Hello, you are very welcome to the final day of ENDORSE 2021, the very first ever European data conference on reference data and semantics, organised by the Publications Office of the European Union. So very pleased to have you with us. We've had 3 action-packed days. We've heard so much about semantics and about databases, but today's topic is linking data spaces. Now, please do share on social media. We want you to do that. I want you to follow the accounts EU Law Data Pubs, EU Publications and EU_Open Data and EU Lex. They're all on Twitter and we'll be tweeting about our discussions today. Remember to use the hashtag ENDORSE2021. Now, as always, all this week, we have been using Slido to interact with the audience. So please go to slido.com or sli.do in your browser. There's no need to download anything. Just put in the code ENDORSE2021. And let's do an icebreaker question. Once you go to the polls section, you'll see which messages stood out for you over the previous days. We want to know your assessment of the last 3 days of talks. So please do pop it in there and we will come back and have a look at your thoughts and comments. And you can use Slido to ask questions of our panelists, and there will also be an opportunity to use another platform to ask questions later on, but I'll tell you about that as we get there. Now, yesterday we heard about data quality in the procurement process, how to make linked data more reusable. We learned a bit about the e-procurement BDTI pilot as well, and AI uses and the need to keep the underlying infrastructure green. So today we're going to kickstart with a keynote from Fabien Gandon, Senior Researcher and Research Director at Inria, who's going to tell us about linked data and EU sovereignty, something that's very much in the news at the moment. Over to you,
very much. Yeah, thank you very much. Let me share my screen. Here we go. So hopefully everything is going okay and you can see my screen now.
Yes, we can.
So thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Fabien Gandon, and I wanted to start with a small disclaimer. I wanted to point out that I have a bias. I come from computer science and applied mathematics. I'm currently a research director at Inria. I'm leading a research team there on social semantics and formal semantics, but I'm also part of the advisory committee of W3C. And this is going to be important to the talk I will be giving today, because what I want to defend is that web open standards are in fact key to EU digital sovereignty. So the teams I'm leading in Sofia Antipolis is called WIMIX. And if you look at the red keywords that are associated to some of the tenured researchers of the team, you will see that we work on AI applied to the web. We work on semantic web. We work on knowledge representation, learning, multi-agent system, natural language processing. But there is one keyword that appears for everyone, it's knowledge graph. Because everyone in my team is interested in contributing to one or another step of the life cycle of a knowledge graph, whether it is to create a knowledge graph, to maintain it, to query it, to validate it, to use it to support an epistemic community. They are all interested at one point in working with the knowledge graph, but not any knowledge graph. We really want to focus on knowledge graphs that are leveraging the standards for web data and linked data on the web. So we are part of the W3C. We contribute to this standard, we reuse them, we extend them. And we do that because we really think it is a very important aspect in ensuring interoperability across many systems and many domains. So the first thing I want to do is to explain how these web standards are obtained and what is the process and what is the consortium behind it. So the consortium is the World Wide Web Consortium. It's an international community leading the web to its full potential since 1994. And it is building an open, interoperable web that works for everyone. And it does that by developing freely available and open standards. Now, the W3C has more than 430 organization members all around the world. It's in touch with more than 12,000 developers worldwide. It has staff of 50 people supported by the membership. And it works through groups, especially working groups, 38 working groups that provides a standard that create recommendations at WCC that are called standard, but also interest groups, and more than 350 business group and community groups that really touch on many, many different topics, from finance to philosophy on the web, many different topics. And all these people, they provide hundreds of open technology that power our browsers, our smartphones, the ebook readers, the set-top box you have at home, automobiles, we have search engine, of course, social media, well, trillions of dollars of online commerce, and much more than 1 billion websites. Here I put a few examples of the former and current members of WCC. You will recognize several logos, and also I put an example of standards that are produced at WCC. So you have the usual suspects, such as HTML, URL, HTTP, that are the core of the web, and we'll come back to that. But there are many, many other standards, and I think a lot of people do not realize how many standards are provided by W3C. So now that we have this consortium to work on web open standards, let's talk about the object in itself. The web is distributed interoperable hypermedia. And I insist here, I'm talking about the web. I'm not talking about the internet. These are two different things. I always want to clear that point at the beginning of the talks. The web is that hypermedia that was invented by Tim Berners-Lee and is above the internet infrastructure and standards. And in this history of providing the web, there are two important things for us today. One is that when it was invented at CERN, CERN issued a statement to make all the web software released into the public domain. And that's a key element in making the web interoperable, in my opinion. And also, if you look at the first page of the document, the proposal made by Tim Berners-Lee in March 1989, you will see that from the beginning, the idea of the web was not only to be a hypertext, or not only to link documents, but in fact to link many things, almost everything, through this hypermedia. So it could be a document, it could be a person, it could be an organization, it could be a database, it could be a topic, and so on. So from the beginning, a hypermedia on top of the internet, released into the public domain to link absolutely everything. The three key components of the web architecture, you all know them, are the addressing and identification system, the URL, this address we use every day, a protocol to communicate between the client and the servers in particular, and representation languages such as HTML that allow us to represent a web page and send it from a server to a client. But again, from the beginning, the vision was much broader than just linking and exchanging documents. And here I'm putting an article from 1994 in which Tim is insisting again with his co-author on a needed evolution of the web to go beyond object being principally human-readable document on the web, to contain more machine-oriented semantic information and allow more sophisticated processing. This is what he will call semantic web, and also we now call linked data. So to move from this web of HTML document linked together to a web of data, one of the first steps is to provide standards for distributed and interoperable identifiers. So what we change in the web architecture is, instead of talking about universal resource locator only, so talking about locating something on the web, we talk about universal resource identifier, identifying things on the web. In other words, the URL can be seen as a way to identify what exists on the web, and the URI was a change that allowed us to identify on the web what exists, meaning anything around us, even if it's not connected to the web, even if it's not on the web, I can actually identify it. I can identify my necktie on the web if I need. And now we have URIs for everything. We have URIs for a city like Paris in DBpedia. We have a URI for the name of Victor Hugo in the Library of Congress in the US. We have a URI for a protein in UniProt, for Xavier Dolan in Wikidata, for a book. And we see them everywhere. We see them on our cakes, on the top of our building, on on animals in the street, everywhere through these QR codes. One example in Europe, for instance, is the work done by the car manufacturer Renault in 2012, where they decided to use URI to identify car configuration. So I mean really configuration. They're not identifying a car, they're not identifying a model, they're identifying all the possible configuration of all the possible cars they manufacture with all the possible options and their possible values. This is a huge space, 10 to the power 25. And for each one of them, they give it to URI to identify that configuration, to know if it exists or not, because some configuration are not compatible, some options are not compatible, and to link them together to see what configuration has in common with another one. And once this is identified, it allows them, for instance, to have interoperability between their tools inside Renault, but also in their subsidiaries with their contractors. Next step, once I can identify everything, the web provides also open standard to provide data about these things. So to have distributed and interoperable metadata about everything I identify, about my necktie, the car configuration, a protein, anything. So how do we do that? We extend again, and instead of just exchanging HTML, we exchange data, and for that we have a W3C standard called RDF, which is a web standard for knowledge graph representation to distribute, exchange, represent this graph on the web. So how does it work? Well, if I take again the URI of my city, Paris, that I had before, if I don't know what this represents, because it's a URI, and more precisely an HTTP URI, a web-based URI, there is an obvious thing I can do. I can do a get on it. I can ask the web, what is there? And if I'm a human and things are set up properly, I will get a web page explaining me what is this URI about, what are the properties of that. For instance, it's a city, it has for name Paris, it's France, and so on. But the nice thing also is that the web standard, they support content negotiation. So for the same URI, for the same identifier of the city Paris, if a machine goes there, it can negotiate something else than HTML. It can negotiate RDF and get data that it can load in its database. So one URI, a different answer, content negotiation, and a human gets page, and a machine gets data ready to be processed or loaded in its graph base. And it's even more than data, it's linked data, because whether you are a human and you receive a page, or you are a machine, these answers, they contain links to other resources, to other topics, to other things, to other databases, so that you can continue to browse and navigate. So if you're human, you can click on the link about France, for instance, and discover data about France. But if you're a machine, you can do the same. You can follow your nose, use these URIs, discover a new resource talking about France, the data about France, and so on, move to European Union, and so on. I talked about Paris, but again, I could have taken many other URIs. If I take the URI of a protein, I will do the same. If I'm a human and I go to that URI about the protein MUC18, I will get a web page. But if I'm a machine, I will get data about that protein ready to be loaded in my database. And applying this approach, starting in 2007, people started to publish database online, data sets. And let's say a visible tip of the iceberg are open data sets using that approach, where people publish online their data and they link it to other data sets. And what you see here is the trend over 10 years of the number of databases that have been published with this approach and the cloud of the links that they have together, which is every time a data set makes a relation to another data set. But this is only the visible tip of the iceberg. All these technologies and the web technologies, we all know they are not only used on the open web, we also use them, for instance, on the intranet. Our intranet use a lot of web technology. And it's just the same for knowledge graph and linked data. You can use them internally. So for instance, if I take the city of Dublin, there was a smart city project there and run by IBM. And the way they performed the integration was to have a knowledge graph where you have all the internal data of the city sensors, for instance. That's the big red graph you have here. but also data taken from knowledge graph from the web, so DBpedia about the city, or other websites or APIs, such as Eventful, to know that a concert is going on in Dublin. And by doing that, you can consolidate a huge knowledge graph, having all these information, your sensors, the events going on, and use that as a basis for your analysis, using, for instance, what you got from the web as new dimension to analyze what's going on, what you see on your sensor, predict, and try to produce explanation of a phenomenon you're seeing in the city. So again, RDF can be used on the open web for linked open data, but it can be used internally, and a lot of companies are now using them for their internal knowledge graph. Now that you have data, you want to access them, and you want to precisely retrieve a piece of this data to be able to query it, to access it. And again, the web provides a standard for them. One of the key standards provided for that is Sparkle, which is a query language that allows you to connect to one of these servers and get precisely a subpart of the data you want. So it's like an SQL, if you prefer, for this RDF language. And the little query I'm demonstrating here is asking for all the capital in Europe with their name in English and Japanese. And what I get are data that I can directly load in my database again. For instance, if I'm building an interface for a traveling agency or something like that. Travel agency. Another example is the DBpedia project that extracts data from Wikipedia. In my team, we host the French chapter of DBpedia, and we extract RDF from the DBpedia, and we make it available through a Sparkle endpoint that is publicly available for people to query if they need some of this data. A more recent example of that is the work done in the project COVID on the Web, where we extracted COVID data from the COVID-19 corpus, and we consolidated it with many other data sets. We performed natural language and information extraction on them, including name entity recognition or argument mining on the article to see what were the claims and evidences in the article. We use the semantic web framework that we've seen to perform inferences and validation, and then we provide a public endpoint on this data and validation services. So for instance, here, someone is looking at the SARS-CoV publication that are linked to different types of cancers, and to see what are the publications making a link between these two domains. So now I have means to access my data, to identify things, to describe things. Another very important standard that is bringing a lot of attention to RDF graph is the ability to validate. So we have now Web Open Standard to distribute in an interoperable way validation constraints. It's done through the Shackle language, which is a language for describing and validating pieces of RDF knowledge graph. So for instance, you can say, whenever there is a person in the graph, it must have one and only one name. And you can enforce that and have a report on the knowledge graph, and especially a report on the part that are not compliant with this constraint. So it can be used to validate your knowledge graph, but it can also be used to describe your services. So for instance, to describe what your platform or service or application is expecting as input, or what it is producing as an output. You can describe it with a Shackle pattern. You can use it to generate interactions. So for instance, you can use Shackle rules to generate interfaces to have inputs from users and validate the inputs from the users. You can use it in integration of data, on code generation, many different domains. A European example of this use is, for instance, the AI for EU project, in which we contribute to the ontology for AI itself. It's an ontology to provide metadata about AI resources and to describe the different AI resources that are available. And when you do such a description for a resource, you want to validate it to make sure it's not missing something. And the validation is done in Shackle for this RDF graph. And here you have the online endpoint if you want to test it. Okay, so last but not least, on top of this linked data that we are able to publish on the internet and on our intranets, we now have also the ability to publish the vocabularies, the semantics of this data, and to link them. So it's not only linked data, it's linked vocabularies that we are publishing on the web. And again, this relies on W3C standards. So for instance, the RDFS language to declare classes of resources and properties for your knowledge graph and to organize them in a hierarchy to say that every time you have a resource of a type report, it's going to be also of the type document because it's a subclass, or a property author is a subproperty of creator. And if you need more semantics, if you need to perform more reasoning, there is a second language on top of that called OWL that allows you to provide formal definition for your ontology. For instance, to say that a class is the intersection of two other classes. And this can be used in many domains, and even, I would say, to perform interoperability between different AI methods. So for instance, the example I'm giving here is an application at the hospital in Nice, where we looked at predicting hospitalization, and more precisely, trying to predict the hospitalization from a physician record classification. But what we did is to analyze this record, to represent them, of course, using semantic web standard, but also to augment them using knowledge graph available on the web, to add to the physician report whatever information we could find online about the drugs that were mentioned, about the diseases that were mentioned, about the operation that were mentioned, about the anatomic function that were mentioned, and so on. So we take the reports, and before we run any learning or prediction, we augment them with this data in order to study the impact on the ability to predict the hospitalization. Another type of standard provided at W3C is Sklarß. This one is not really for ontologies or schema, it's more for thesaurus or lexicon. So for instance, a domain in which it is used a lot is to represent the index of a library. The links between the Library of Congress in the US and the BNF French library are, for instance, represented in Sklarß. And it allows you to say, for instance, that topic linear algebra has for broader topic algebra, and algebra has for broader topic mathematics. That's the sort of thing you would find in a Sklarß thesaurus. And we use that with the Ministry of Culture in France to work on the Joconde database, which is a database from the French Museum. This database is very interesting because it contains images of artworks, and it contains the metadata about the artwork in RDF. So we have both images and RDF in the same database. And how do we cope with that? Well, we use and reason on the RDF to build training sets to train a classifier on targeted categories. So for instance, topics or object or techniques we want to recognize in the artwork collection. So the training sets are built by reasoning and querying the RDF, then we train them. And then the output is represented in RDF again so that we can query and reason on it, for instance, to detect silences or noises in the cultural collection. So to detect that a horse is mentioned when it is not here on the in the artwork, or a horse is in the artwork, but it's not mentioned in the metadata. So I gave a lot of examples of domain and task in which we can use these different standards, but I wanted also to make very clear that these standards, they allow us to provide interoperable platforms that are completely generic and reusable across domains or tasks. And this is, for instance, the case of Solid, which was created by the inventor of the web, Tim Berners-Lee. And the idea for Tim was to reshape the web as we know it. And he proposed Solid as a set of convention and tools to build decentralized web application based on linked data principle. And what this statement clearly says is that to provide such an interoperable platform, independently of where you're going to deploy it or the task you want to use it for, it has to rely as much as possible on existing W3C standard to be interoperable. And when you look at the list of the standards that allow Solid to exist, you find RDF, you find ontologies, you find HTML, and so on. So these standards, they also allow us to imagine new kinds of architecture and interoperable platform by existing. So now let me finish with a last part and address somehow the elephant in the room, if I may say, which was the proposal of my title of my keynote, which is I believe that the web open standards, they are also very important for us if we want to build federated, distributed, interoperable Europe. So I believe that W3C, is a strategic place to survey and shape web standards. Here I put screenshots of 3 different charters of W3C. One is the RDF data shape, so validation charter. The other one is the HTML charter. And the last one is a proposed charter for mini apps. So application that use web standard to be available and transferable from a mobile platform to another. Now, what I put in red and what I wanted to insist on is that for RDF data shapes, the 3 chairs are 3 US companies, Top Quadrant, OpenLink, and IBM. For HTML, again, 3 companies, IBM, Microsoft, and Apple from the US. And the mini apps, the chairs are Alibaba, Huawei, and Byte. And the point and my personal opinion that I wanted to share with you here is that I think it's really important to have a neutral place such as W3C to build open standard. I say neutral place because when you are a member, you have one vote, whoever you are as a member. So I really like this idea. I also think it's important to have public and private member participating to WCC for the balance. It's really important. And I think it's important to have a large European participation to WCC because these standards are shaping a lot of things. So we really need to participate to this standardization. So I see Web Open Standard and the worldwide interoperability support as a key enabler of EU digital sovereignty. I think interoperability is strategic to federate our actors and actions, and we have to rely on such open standard for that. I think the Web Open Standard, they are transversal to many domain and tasks. We've seen it with the many applications I mentioned. So anyone in any domain, any activity should feel concerned by them. I think it's also more important that knowledge graphs are becoming a very important topic, and we don't want to create knowledge silos. We really need to push open standard option. And so having established open standard between actors in Europe, public and private, is a stake for setting up a European data space. So my message in the bottle would be, we really need an active participation to WCC. It is a key to build EU digital sovereignty. And I thank you for your attention.
Fabien, thank you very much. Now, our audience has been sending in questions for you on Slido. We'll start with one from Seth van Holland. As a leading researcher in the field, what would be the key strategic subtask from the linked data field that the EU should invest in?
Key strategic task from the linked, can you repeat, please, just?
So what would be the key strategic subtask from the linked data field?
Very good question. I think it's really important that looking at the evolution right now and the fact that some of the key standards of linked data, such as RDF, may go through a new evolution and go through new versions. We have proposal to make them available. I think the priority is for Europe to participate to that. If we are, for instance, to version RDF and go to a new version of RDF, we need to be present there and to be there with our scenarios and our requests to make sure that this new version is the one we need to build our data lakes or to link our data lakes, for instance.
Thank you. We have another question as well asking, how is the quality of the linked open data managed?
So when I provoke my student in the course, I usually tell them the web is a garbage. The semantic web is a semantic garbage. But the good news is that because we have semantics, we can do West sorting, semantic West sorting and inferencing. So you cannot enforce quality at the scale of the web. But what you can do, for instance, is publish what are your shackle constraints in terms of things you expect from someone, and to enforce that whenever you interact with that person. So the key thing, again, is to think in terms of decentralized way and enable us for us and for everyone around us to publish their constraints because what you define as quality data is not necessarily what I define as quality data. And what we really need is a way to express this constraint and exchange them.
Okay, we'll possibly get on to talking about data hygiene at another point. We have a question from Anonymous asking, how can I rebuild my website which uses relational databases so that it's linked to open data?
So there's been, I couldn't mention all the standards, but there's been a whole lot of activity on different ways to lift data. So you had R2RML languages to transform, to publish mappings from relational database to RDF domain. You have all sorts of tools such as LDP platform, that is a REST approach that could be plugged on top of a relational database to publish things. And some people have looked at automation ways to transform relational data to a linked data platform. So there are several options on the table, but I couldn't possibly cover this detail today.
Okay, well, thank you for going as far as you have. A final question, just asking, Fabien, you've mentioned that you're from computer science. Do you also work with librarians when describing resources, and do you have any examples of how that works?
So yes, I worked with librarians in the past. I also work with people from museum in the examples I mentioned. So these are always very interesting because if you take the case of our librarian, for instance, this community has been working on indexing and organizing information for so long, much before than the web. So they always bring very interesting problems, but also very important practices and models. And also we have to remember that they are among the pioneers of the domain. The Dublin core is one of the most well-known vocabulary of the semantic linked data, and it is from the librarian community.
Okay, and a question has just come in. I quite liked this one myself. They're saying your message is clear. In practice, who needs to change to enlarge EU participation in the W3C work groups? Is it about willingness, or are there investments needed?
So when you join W3C, there is a member fee. So of course you have to pay that member fee, but it's really small member fee. I think. If I may be provocative, I don't think the problem is in the willingness or the investment. It's in the awareness. Many people do not realize how important to be there. It's we know many standardization body out there, and we can see European participation in many of them. W3C, we should be more present, I believe, because this hypermedia on top of the internet is not just one application of the internet. It's almost the killing app of the internet in a sense, and we really have to be very careful what's going on. So, and if I may add, it's really for everyone. Developer participates to the WCC. Public can review everything. Public organizations should be part of the WCC. Private organizations. It's really about everyone participating, governments, and even at the EU level.
Okay, well, thank you very much. It's a great place to leave it. Very much enjoyed your presentation. And you have said it's as an underlying requirement for European data spaces, and we will later on be talking about Gaia-X. So a really good way to set us up for today's conversation. We're going to go back now and have a look at your comments on Slido. We asked you which messages stood out for you most over the previous days. So no AI without IA, and it was no artificial intelligence without information architecture, knowledge graphs, cooperation, knowledge graphs again, benefits of interoperability, make linked data easier for developers, collaboration, metadata, 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 and the importance of data quality. Well, quite a few of those things overlapping there, so we're getting strong messages. And of course, the theme of the whole 4 days has been interoperability. So keep asking your questions using Slido. We're going to go on to our next speaker now, who is from the European Commission. We have Daniele Ritzy, who's going to tell us about the EU data strategy and its approach on the interoperability within and across the data spaces. I believe we have a... to the next WebEx meeting. Okay, sorry, you need to move into the next WebEx meeting. You can't follow that here on this track. So you need to click on into the new link. You should, if you registered, you will have received an email with the link. Otherwise, you can scroll down to the page and click into that new link. I hope you all enjoyed that keynote speech from Fabien Gandon. It's certainly fascinating. Now we are, as I say, moving on with our program here. You can follow along using Slido or ask questions in the chat. But our next speaker is Daniele Ritzy from the European Commission, talking about the EU data strategy and its approach on the interoperability within and across data spaces. Daniele, it's good to see you, albeit remotely. The floor is yours. Give us your intervention. Daniele, can you hear me or see me? Oh dear. Hello, Daniele, can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly now.
Oh, great. That's wonderful. It's very good to see and hear you now, albeit remotely. It's been a while. But the floor is yours, so I'll leave it to you now to do your presentation.
Okay, great, because I was following you on the other channel, and now I switch to this more interactive way, at least for me to share my video and make my presentation. So while I upload my presentation, I will, well, tell you in a few words where I come from. My name is Daniele Ritzy. Thank you for your introduction. I work in the European Commission in a unit called Data Policy and Innovation in DG Connect. And I hope that in the meantime, my presentation is going to be shown. Voila. So I hope it's out there. So is it?
We can't see anything at the moment.
No, okay. So share. It will come then. Okay, now it should be out there.
Ah, yes.
Maybe
Now something is happening.
Okay, great. Great, there it is, I think. Okay, perfect. So sorry for these usual small glitches in the technicalities. So I come from this unit, Data Policy and Innovation in DG Connect. So we are those who address what the Commission is proposing in terms of data strategy. So DG Connect is in general dealing with the digitization at the European level, proposing legal and non-legal instruments. In our unit, and we have several units all dealing with specific domains, and those specialized in transport, in environment, and so on. In our unit, we are more horizontal, and this is basically what you will see in my presentation now, how we want to address issues which are horizontal, so which are across domain, to try to implement a data strategy which is able to not only have a good working in terms of individual domain, but also across domains. So, okay, as usual, there is a problem with the, okay. So there are problems as usual, because we are there to try to solve or to propose a solution to these problems. The problems are well known, but just to remind the main key issues that we want to address. There are a lot of data out there, but they are not always so easy available for reuse for many reasons, technical and non-technical. Even if we have some legal instruments, maybe we can still do more in terms of making available more public sector data. And we also wanted, especially since a few years, also to promote a more global approach on data sharing, including the private sector as well. On the side of the platforms, there is a certain lack of European data processing and storage solutions. There are, of course, many out there, but let's say less European based. And the idea here is to try to go into a direction to try to have a bit more autonomy in this respect. Government and governance are a bit lacking, so we still can see that there are some diversified approach, and probably at the European level, we need an approach which is more global. The problem with shortage of skills is evident. The pace at which technology and knowledge is developing makes the traditional ways of learning at a university maybe not outdated, but needing to be adapted to a different way of developing skills. Users are not always empowered on both sides to reuse data and to make them data available. There are still uncertainties, and we want to address all these issues in a way or the other. So the European Strategy of Data, it is a communication which was adopted and published more or less 1 year ago. It was in February 2020. What is basically based on 4 pillars. So want to provide instruments to address 4 main issues: facilitating the flow of data within EU, so across countries and also across sectors. Facilitate and improve the quality of the data in order to have them more adapted to create and innovate. We want to facilitate the fact that the reuse of data must be made clear in order to improve the trust in those who make data available and those who reuse data. And we will see that the Data Governance Act is basically addressing this specific issue. And finally, but of course not less important, all this has to be made in full respect of the European rules and the European principles, which are the ethical principles and the respect of the personal data and the privacy, which is something which is at the basis of one of our main European principles. So the European Strategy of Data, issued in a bit more than 1 year ago, containing a certain number of actions to be addressed by the European Commission, so proposals for some legal and non-legal instruments. And this has led so far to two acts which have been already adopted as proposals. The Data Governance Act, so the main subject of my presentation, and the Digital Market Act, adopted as a proposal in December 2020 to regulate the market power based on data. This does not come from our unit, and is something which has been finally adopted after a long period of discussions with our co-legislators. A specific regulation which stems from the Open Data Directive, and which I will describe a bit later, is addressing particularly data generated by public administrations, and wants to create even more ways to facilitate a certain number of data sets generated by public administration for the public good. We are working now also on a so-called Data Act, which should be ready by the end of this year, which will address issues complementary to the ones of the Data Governance Act. And of course, all this is, as I said, mostly addressing horizontal issues, but then this is complemented, and in parallel, we have a lot of other activities addressing sectoral legislation. And this is just one example. For the end of this year, we the Commission, not my unit, is going to adopt a legal act to regulate or to facilitate the access to in-vehicle data, which is one of the sectors where a lot of data are generated, in this case by machine, but there are a lot of issues in terms also of protection of privacy, in terms of who owns the data or who has the right to reuse of data. I am the owner of a car which generates data, but at the same time, this data are generated by devices which may be owned or protected by the car manufacturer. And it's a very complicated issue, and it's in a way exemplifies how the data sharing is a quite a complex issue, and entails a lot of problems coming from the technical and the non-technical domain. So these are a few quotations of what the data strategy was indicated, in particular for what concerns standardization. There was a clear mention to the rolling plan for ICT standardization, which has, I think, already been presented in the conference. There is a requirement, which is indeed what we have done, adopting the Data Governance Act, on the Commission to create to propose a legislative framework for the governance of common European data spaces. And just to underline the importance that that interoperability and standardization is given in the data strategy, there is this section where we say that it is important to create a mechanism to prioritize standardization activities and working towards a more harmonized description and overview of data sets. So all this is very important, and this is just to show that standardization is a key point in our data strategy. There is also a reference to the high-value datasets, which I will also describe a bit later. So, first of all, what are these common European data spaces? The idea here is to create environments dedicated to the data sharing of specific key domains. So the other strategy mentioned a few of them. You can see here a few: health, industry, agriculture, mobility, and so on. And the idea is not to create a monolithic data repository where all data should be stored in the same place and physically belong to the same concrete infrastructure. The idea is more to create, the idea is more a sort of concept. So having indeed access to a rich pool of data, but not necessarily stored in the same place, and data which should be made accessible and interoperable through the implementation of technical tools, through the implementation of interoperable standards for interoperability, and also for ways of accessing and sharing data, not only from the technical point of view, but also from, let's say, the legal point of view. For example, associating to data clear licenses to let the reusers know exactly what they can do with the data, and to let the data owners to be sure that what they make available is reused under certain specific conditions. So this is, these are the verticals, the domains, but of course you also need a certain glue to be sure that we also have a certain degree of interoperability across domains. And this is one of the issues which is addressed by the Data Governance Act, and also by some other more, let's say, operational actions, which I will also describe a bit later in this presentation. So finally, here we are with the proposal for the regulation on European data governance. This is a proposal adopted in November last year. It is based on 4 pillars. And the overall scope, as I said, is to create and improve trust in data sharing. Trust in those who let their data be used by someone else, freely or under payment, and trust for those who reuse those data, so they can rely on a guarantee that they are allowed to do what they want to do with those data, and the sources are guaranteed, and so on. So going a bit more in detail in these 4 points. I'm sorry, but I have to go a bit back. Here we are. So the first pillar is addressing the reuse of protected data held by public sector bodies. You may know already, or certainly you know, the Open Data Directive, the one which was formerly called the Public Sector Information Directive. It is addressing specifically public administrations, creating certain obligation for them to make available the data that they generate because they have to execute certain tasks in their mandate, and their mandate generates data. So this, in a way, it is considered as public, something which is public and should be made available as much as possible to everybody and free of charge. There are still, of course, some exceptions to this obligation to make data available. There are, of course, security issues which may forbid to have some data public. This is normal. But there are also, for example, data which may contain IPRs from third parties, for which the public administration are not fully allowed or to distribute. Or there are some privacy issues which limit the distribution of data to specific categories. Typical example is a statistical institute, which generates statistics which are public, but also certain statistics which are more detailed, which may contain or entail problems with the privacy issues. And in that case, these statistics are very often only made available to specific categories of users, or under very specific conditions, or for very specific reuses. This is something that the Open Data Directive is not allowing. So the Open Data Directive is basically a yes-no option. Either you can make data available to everybody, and then you do, or for some reason you can't and you don't. The first pillar of this Data Governance Act is defining some rules to make available this data under certain specific conditions. So the reuse will not be for everybody, but can still be regulated. And this is in view of improving the potential reuse of this data, even if this data will not be available to everybody. The second pillar defines a framework for data intermediaries. So the objective in general of the data strategy is to make available more data for improving the data market in Europe. And we have defined an important role for data intermediaries, so the brokers who put together those who sell or make data available and those who want to reuse data. So there are a certain number of regulations to have these data intermediaries be recognized, for example, through a sort of a board of them, in order to have them accessible and regulated to create a trust in this exchange of data. The third pillar regards a specific framework for data altruism. Sorry. And what we mean here is trying to define some rules for those who want to share data, but not necessarily to everybody. And here, in particular, we are addressing issues related to personal data and issues related to individuals who would like to share data for the public benefit, but do not want to share their data with everybody. As an individual, I would like to, for example, to share my health data with the hospitals of my country or all hospitals in Europe. I would like maybe to share part of my health data with research institutes, but not necessarily want to share my data with others who could maybe abuse or even just make money out of my data. So this is this third pillar is dedicated to define some first rules to regulate these ways of sharing data, in particular personal data. Finally, there is a fourth pillar, which I will detail a bit more, the suggestion to set up a European Data Innovation Board to assist the Commission in developing recommendation practices for the use of data, for the data intermediaries, for all the other pillars that I've explained so far. And also, and this is why I put a bit more of an importance here, for the governance of technical standardization to enhance this interoperability across borders and across sectors. So this is a board which should be made composed by stakeholders in the different domains, of course, member states, experts, and so on. And for us, this will be a vital body to assist the Commission in the way in which we want to proceed in terms of both additional legal acts and also implementation of the data strategy through the programs which will provide some support to the data strategy deployment. Yes?
Daniele, I think I'm going to have to ask you to wrap it up there. If you want to answer a couple of quick questions,
sure.
that would be good, because we need to try and keep on schedule today.
So this is something related more in detail on the European Innovation Board. You will have the slides so you can read them easily. This is what the regulation will say. Finally, this is just to mention that the second act that we will adopt most probably before the end of the year of spring will be this legal act to make available high-value datasets, so datasets generated by public administrations, completely free of charge, and through APIs, which should improve the availability of data. Finally, really my last slide, all this, of course, needs some support to be deployed. That is the beginning. So we are also in the way of adopting the so-called Digital Europe program, which has foresees a lot of investment in supporting the deployment of data spaces and horizontal activities which would like to create a glue across these domain-related data spaces. In particular, this data spaces support center, which will create again a sort of board to support the data spaces in their activities, provide them building blocks, and take care that there is interoperability across sectors. Voilà, this is all. I have to be rush a bit.
Thank you, but you covered all the main points.
Yeah, I'm very happy to reply to questions.
Yes, and actually you did just respond to one of the questions just there in your summing up. It was a question about whether you foresee interoperability between certain European government data portals. So I think you've answered that clearly. And then this other question is, will the data management plans of EU-funded projects be required to contribute to EU data spaces? I suppose given that this is still a proposal, we don't know 100% yet.
I am not sure I have understood completely the question, but if the question is, okay.
Yeah.
If the question is if there will be support to deployment of data spaces, yes, there will be.
Yep.
Data spaces not necessarily are, I think for us it's important to underline that not necessarily the data spaces that we see are the data spaces that you will discover in the Digital Euro program. Data spaces are a concept which should be deployed in all domains. Of course, there is a need to support in budgetary terms the deployment of the data spaces, and at least for the first couple of years of the work program in Digital Europe, there will be some data spaces which receive some funding, but this will be complemented later on with other funding, with the idea of having, as all we support, one day something which is sustainable.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, and I look forward to talking to you again, particularly on Pillar 3 and that data donor card idea. We're going to turn now to our next speakers who will tell us about advancing interoperability of digital public spaces for Europe in the Gaia-X ecosystem, something that has been making headlines in the last year or so. To discuss that, we have Christoph Lange-Bever from the Fraunhofer Institute for Applied Information Technology at Aachen University. Christoph, there you are. Wonderful.
Thank you very much for the introduction. So indeed, I have been involved into the core of Gaia-X for a while, more than half a year now, and quite exciting things are going on there, as I will try to show you. So in this talk, we'll cover Gaia-X and also one of its foundations, the international data spaces, and how these architectures and technologies help to advance interoperability, and how this could help the public sector in Europe. Okay, let's look at the existing solutions that Europe has for digital public services. That's on the one hand, as you see on the left part of the slide, the Connecting Europe facility that ran from 2014 till last year, and where development of a lot of services were contracted. For example, for a secure and trusted exchange of data, for archiving, invoicing, all the things that businesses and also public organizations in Europe might need. And there was, with even more of a focus on public administration, there was the ISA 2 program for interoperability solutions for public administrations, as well as businesses and citizens. That also ended last year. This has this has also produced a number, dozens of software offerings and of other solutions in terms of, for example, best practice guides or assessment schemes to assess your existing business processes. Now, and what is now starting, what has very recently been adopted politically is the Digital Europe program. that will now run from now on over 6 years. And so an interesting question is, all these services that that exist, what future will they have in the Digital Europe program, and in what connection is that with the European data strategy as it was just presented? Here in this presentation, there is not a dedicated slide about the European data strategy, so I will tell this to you on the audio track. You've just learned, we all have just been reminded that a key objective of the European data strategy is to establish sector-specific data spaces. And, well, public administration is certainly one of these sectors of focus. Other sectors, well, they relate to basically to the key societal challenges as in advancing healthcare, sustainable mobility, agriculture, and so on. And well, now on this slide, I'm showing you quite a technical diagram. How is that related? Well, Gaiax is an initiative towards a federated infrastructure for sovereign data exchange according to European values. Gaiax sees itself in line with the European data strategy. Now, there is not such a thing as a top-down political decision that Gaiax is the technology or the only technology to implement, to be used when implementing the European data strategy. However, Gaiax makes a strong point, saying, well, we will provide technology that is following the spirit of the European data strategy and, well, all these underlying European values, as in, for example, data protection and digital sovereignty. And thus, well, what Gaia-X does is basically leveraging existing network and cloud infrastructure in order to deliver. So the infrastructure, that's what you see in the lower red part of this X figure, and this is leveraged in order to enable the upper part of the X, a data and service ecosystem. And you also see data spaces explicitly placed here. So in these data spaces, data will be exchanged and services will be offered. And this has various technical aspects that need to be considered. For example, identity and trust. Gaia-X is decentral and distributed and federated. So how can you be certain that you can trust the party on the other end with which you are exchanging data? How can you exchange your data in a sovereign way? This means, for example, how can you control the usage of your data if you're exchanging data that is business critical or data that is sensitive? You would like to make sure that, not only by a legal contract but also by technical means that that the recipient of the data uses the data according to, well, according to the policies that you have set up. Related to that is compliance. Are those people who provide services and who provide data and who consume data in these data ecosystems, are they compliant with what they promise, and are they compliant with all the basics that they should feel committed to, including the GDPR? This is something that needs to be monitored continuously. And finally, Gaia-X will also offer a so-called federated catalog that is basically a directory of available data and service offerings. And this will be decentral. So there is not one all Europe catalog, but there can be multiple ones even per data space. That's Gaia-X in a nutshell. And I would like to present another foundation for that, into which I'm involved. So I'm not only am I a co-author of the technical architecture specification of Gaia-X, whose latest version will be released in the next few weeks, and whose earlier version has been released mid of last year. But I'm also one of the co-authors of the reference architecture model of the international data spaces. That is, well, basically think of Gaia-X minus storage and network infrastructure, and with a heavy emphasis on data, and not that much of a focus on services. But regarding the exchange of data, you can consider it pretty much a foundation for for the sovereign data exchange that Gaia-X would like to establish. Here, the focus is on interoperability, trust, via identity management, and on data usage control. There is in the architecture, well, this is quite comprehensive what you see here, but in its heart, it is again a decentral system. There can be multiple peers playing the roles of data provider and data consumer. They have peer-to-peer connections to each other, and then there are some not exactly central services, but within each data space, there have to be certain services. For example, services that tell you where to find data offerings, subject to what conditions. That's what the IDS calls broker. This has to exist in one data space, but again, there can also be multiple alternative brokers. There can be multiple app stores from which the all the actors in the data space consume the software to analyze and to transform their data. Right. Now let us go on. One slide more into depth, and then into technical details, and then we come to what all this means for the public sector in Europe. So this is actually the key area where I myself am an expert, being the product owner of the IDS information model, and also the head of the self-description working group in Gaia-X. That's so the information model of the international data spaces. The purpose of that is that, well, it is used for mainly used for the self-description of the digital resources, the data assets that are being exchanged in a data space. And for that same purpose, a very similar thing will also be used in Gaia-X. But it is also used for the infrastructure components to describe themselves. For example, hey, I'm a broker. Here is how you can connect to me. These are the endpoints that I offer, and these are the languages, as in, well, communication protocols and data formats that I speak. And finally, the same common language is also used for the messages that are exchanged between all the actors in the data space. This information model covers the 6 key concerns of sovereign data exchange that have been identified by the International Data Spaces Association. That is, what is the content of the data? What concepts do the data deal with? SKOS, Simple Knowledge Organization System, that's one of the many standards from W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, that Fabien introduced in his earlier talk. And you will identify more of these standards here on this slide. Then another concern is, in what community of trust am I? Who are the other participants? What certifications of compliance do they have? What contracts exist between them? Again, contracts not only legal text on paper, but also technically implemented. Then data as a commodity. Where does the data come from? What quality does it have? What price? And what policies are attached to it? Then communication. So basically, what is the communication infrastructure in which the data is exchanged? For example, via what endpoint can I access a certain data offering? And finally, the context. Again, highly important for public sector data. Think of open open geospatial data. So space and time, these are the most important context dimensions that we consider. Okay, enough of diving into technical things. Now let's see what role this plays and will play for the public sector in Europe. On the left side, there is a peek into the internal collaboration platform of the Gaiax community, of which everyone who is willing to play by the European rules is invited to become a member. So the Gaia-X Foundation, which has been established recently, this admits organizations as members, and they pay a membership fee, but there is also a broader Gaia-X community to which which can also influence some of the decisions. And what you see here, some of this is some of the labels here. They are still in German, because these domain specific working groups, many of these originated in Germany, but they are now Gaia-X is very dynamic. There are now national hubs in around 10 countries, and there are funding schemes. Probably, I'm not sure whether there is already funding for research and innovation explicitly dedicated to Gaia-X on a European level, but I think this will come soon. There are now major national programs, for example, in Germany and France. And well, the domains of interest, as you can see, for example, agriculture, for example, industry, for example, energy, mobility, and the public sector is also one of these domains of interest. Second spotlight, within the Fraunhofer Society of Applied Research Institutes in Germany, we have recently had a project on urban data spaces. So what possibilities do we see for exchanging data and collaborating in urban spaces, for example, smart cities, but also smart digital government and public services? That's what we have published a study about. This specific study is unfortunately only available in German. And then there is actually also, like, underlying that study, there is technical work, mainly by the Fraunhofer Institute for Open Communication Systems, Fraunhofer Focus, of which colleagues have also been present at the ENDORSE conference. They have shown and implemented how to leverage the international data spaces technical components in order to deal with open data. For example, how to take open data from data sources and make them ready to be used in sovereign data ecosystems where, for example, business-to-business information is exchanged. This business-to-business information might also rely on, for example, public reference data. So what they have shown and at what this diagram here on the right side gives a glance is how to feed public data and open data and reference data into such ecosystems, even if these ecosystems are not public, that is, for example, business to business. Okay, now let's, to wrap up the presentation, let's have a look forward to the Digital Europe program. So the DEP intends to accelerate the recovery and to drive the digital transformation of Europe. It aims to build strategic digital capacities of the EU to facilitate wide deployment of digital technologies, and as the earlier programs, it targets citizens, businesses, and also public administrations. And here I've placed some excerpts from the high-level view on the Digital Europe program. What is in its scope, for example, artificial intelligence, opening up AI for businesses and public administration, developing advanced digital skills by education and training, and also ensuring wide use of digital technologies in public administrations as well as industry. So, as you see, there is a lot of funding available for that, and well, how can it be leveraged? There is. Here, I'm trying to make some links. On the left side, you see a more specific, more technical excerpt from the presentation on the Digital Europe program, which says what data spaces could comprise. In a data space, you need IT systems, you need data governance frameworks, you need standards for semantics and interoperability, and you need a competitive and seamless access to cloud infrastructure. And these terms, they map in an excellent way to the architecture specifications of Gaia-X and international data spaces. For example, Gaia-X does not say we invent a new architecture. We invent a new architecture, and here you have to switch everything to that. But it has an approach of a so-called architecture of standards. So basically, a management approach to include all relevant clouds and interoperability-related standards that already exist. And similarly, here at the bottom right, you see an excerpt from the International Data Spaces Reference Architecture Model that says, for example, what do data apps look like? So intelligent apps that process data and that do boring things such as transforming data, but that also do highly advanced things such as AI analytics on data. And this is so. What I'm trying to say here in a nutshell is that these technological foundations of IDS and Gaia-X, that I believe that these provide an excellent foundation for implementing for making the Digital Europe program real. So to summarize, there is already for the public sector and also for businesses, there is already there are already a lot of solutions that are available. The Connecting Europe facility building blocks and the ISA 2 interoperability solutions, they are mature and they are in operation. Now the call to action should not be, well, let's scrap all that and let's reinvent something new based on Gaia-X and IDS. That's because, as I tried to explain, Gaia-X and IDS, they do not reinvent the wheel either, but they would like to enable a new level of interoperability building on standards that are already widely accepted and that exist. And thus it is clear to see that the existing solutions they can be made ready for interoperability in the new federated, decentral, and sovereign ecosystems that we will have in all these new data spaces. And that is something that is actually worth investigating in more detail. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much there for your presentation. We did get quite a few questions in, but I think you answered some of them that came in earlier as you went through the presentation. So let me just start with kind of a quite broad one, which is, what is the funding model for the platform? And if a partner wants to contribute technology, is it fully publicly funded or is there a commercial layer?
Both.
Yeah.
So let me explain it for Gaia-X. In Gaia-X, a lot of industry participates. There are now more than 300 companies who are, I think, members of the Gaia-X Foundation, and they have their own commercial interests. You see, for example, like recent press releases that say, okay, we already offer a Gaia-X certified cloud services, for example. So there is business to be made there, and then there is also public funding, also for companies as well, for companies who would like to innovate or to make research. There is now, for example, in Germany, a major call for public funding with a budget of, I think, 160 million euros for lighthouse projects of of which each like addresses a certain data space and may have a budget of around 15 million euros. So there is heavy public funding to push this.
Yeah. I think then there was a question saying, does Gaia-X welcome participation from Eastern European countries? Of course it does. We won't delve into that too much. No countries are excluded. And also a request just to wrap up, if you could share a link perhaps in the chat or afterwards to the pilot on urban data to find out whether it's possible for the member states to access the documentation to understand the overall architecture and specifications used. Someone is looking for that link, if you can share it.
Public. One question to the organizers might be, will the slides also go online? Because I've put links behind all the images in the slides, but I'm also happy to paste the links into the chat.
I believe indeed that there will be access to all the information afterwards. Thank you very much for your presentation. Very interesting and a peek behind what we're seeing just in the general news as well. So great for that. We're going to move on now to our next speakers. We have got from the German Ministry of Education and Research, Peter Hassenbach and Sebastian Sklarß, who are telling us about SDGR as a stepping stone for public sector data space and the case of cross-border exchange of educational credentials in particular. So let's have a look at that. Hello, can you see and hear us?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Great. Okay,
yes,
over to you.
Too.
The floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation to present here. My name is Sebastian Sklarß. I'm from init, and I work together with Peter Hassenbach, who perhaps can shortly present himself. Mr. Hassenbach?
Yeah, my name is Peter Hassenbach. I'm in charge for the project in data standardization in educational aspects, and we are, as Mr. Sklarß said, work together in several projects concerning the X standards developed in Germany, which should, of course, be interoperable with the European developments. Mr. Sklarß, please continue.
Yeah, we prepared a Slido. Jennifer, are you aware of it?
Do we have this? I will have to ask the tech team. Do we want to poll people? We have the Slido? Great. Okay, let me remind people, go to slido.com, put in ENDORSE 2021, and you will see the poll. And I see you've got several questions there, so people can answer those. It will work, gentlemen, so go ahead and introduce your question.
So basically, we want to know, do you know what is interoperability? Do you know what is the SDG regulation we will expand on? Do you know, if not, we'll tell you what is special on the educational sector in Germany, and do you know what is X higher? Let's wait some seconds. Okay, I think the results, Jennifer, we can see afterwards. So let's keep on the slides. What is X higher? So yeah, it would be normal if you aren't aware of it at the moment, but we hardly work on implementing this trademark, so to say. X higher is English for X Hochschule. The X, the high, the E explains as the following. X is usually used as a prefix for indicating that XML is used. Higher education institution is what we say in order not to discriminate tertiary education institutions that are not universities like Hochschule. The exchange puts the focus on the interoperability aspect, that the solution we work on here for 1 year is about data exchange between higher education institutions. Let me go to the next slide. Mr. Hassenbach, can you perhaps explain us a bit more in detail the organizational concerns here in Germany?
Yes, here in Germany we have, as the name of the Federal Republic already tells you, we have a federal responsibility for all cultural things. That means that we have the Bundesländer responsible for education and especially also higher education, and within that, the universities and the Fachhochschulen, the applied science universities and others have a high degree of autonomy. So what we have to, if we try to develop standards and also procedures for digitally supported exchange, for example, of student data, for example, when they change their institution or when they access the institutions, of course, we have to get some sort of consensus for joint technical standards to make that possible. And this is actually what all is about. I will tell you later on a little bit the German administration acts which support that. We have actually we are already working some time on that, but the main dynamics in that came in during the last 3 years, something like that. And the legal basis was the German Online Act. In German, it's Onlinezugangsgesetz, which says that about 5,000 administrative services should be digitalized by 2022, which is quite a high threshold to surpass. And there are some administrative services which are also devoted to the institutions. For example, the exchange of higher education institutions, the access, and also the procedures when different diploma have to be seen if they are similar or not. And the German Online Access Act is more or less the national version of single digital gateway regulation of the Commission. It's not completely the same, but there is a very, very big functional overlap. And for example, within the SEG, it should be made possible that every European citizen is able to make administrative or from a list of administrative services the administrative procedures in every country of the United States. And of course, as when for example, access to higher education institutions is part of that list, and it is, then, for example, it should be possible from the Netherlands to manage digitally the access to a German university, for example, or to go from a German university to a place in Spain, also by digitally exchanging the access documents. I would return to Sebastian's class.
Thank you very much. So, well, long story short, if you look at the backdrop, we try to go from here to a situation like this. And in order to digitalize in a successful manner, let's see on the next slide, what are the semantical challenges here? So we have missing common grounds due to the autonomy of the higher education institutions and decades of everyone, let's say, being in Germany, having European programs like Erasmus, but on the other hand side, fighting against each other a bit, for the students. We have a situation where nearly every higher education institution now has its own type of diploma structure, its own shape and form, metadata, and so we have this great variety, which is based on historical facts and on the fact that it is distributed. We have diplomas issued on papers at the moment. There's, as far as I know, only University of Göttingen with a digital certificate, but often diplomas are issued in German and in English. But as said, on paper, not always an XML file comes with it, what we would need for a seamless data exchange here. We also have other half-standardized templates like the diploma supplement and the transcript of record, or the certificate of enrollment, which is the Immatrikulationsbescheinigung. but again, they are kind of standardized on labels and what to put in, but not on the values and on the serialization, so to say, in these words. What we see here also is that on the top of X-Higher standardization stack, we have W3C. We saw the presentation earlier from W3C, and of course, we base our developments on the W3C stack, XML, XSD, schematron. On these de facto standards and recommendations we reuse EDCE, which is Europass data model, Europass digital credential initiative it was called. Anthony Camilleri yesterday told you in a slot what help was given to Europass by Publications Office. And we have a German national interoperability framework called XEV. So you see on the bottom, X Hochschule and X Schule, secondary and tertiary education, trying to form a common ground here on something called X education. And we want to be SDG compliant. So our diplomas should fulfill the data model on SDG currently developed by ISA Square. And yeah, this is the aim. This is one of our last slides, and we have a short video brought to you in order to accompany your coffee, for instance. So there was someone, I think it was Tannenbaum, saying, let me just check. Yeah, the nice thing on standards is that there are so many of them. And this brings me to this slide. So we saw Daniele Ritzy, this 2 speeches before, telling about governance of technical standardization to enhance interoperability and to tell us about towards more harmonized descriptions. And we want to say from a member state point of view, yes, we need this, because this is the situation we found here 1 year ago. We had a member state driven standard based on a SAN agreement, MREX ELMO. Then we found DG Ample Europass, and we saw Erasmus without paper standards. And while discovering this, we were involved in Digit ISA Square activities to build another standardization activity with regards to the SDG directive. So from the point of a higher education institution, suddenly there were 3 or 4 overlapping standards, all free to use, all on GitHub, all very inclusive, but a bit covering the same things. So now what we do with X-Higher, we try to build an interoperability layer on it. So we, as you saw, we reuse W3C, we map to SDG, we have an heritage of Europass, so we have Europass as a core, and then we extend the German properties needed for the Online Access Act, as Mr. Hassenbach said. What we can do is provide the mappings to Publications Office vocabularies or to Europass, and we actively participate in the EU working group. So sometimes, in order, we have the decision, either we create our German field or we make a change request on European level, and often it's succeeded, as said here in the call, and Max Deckers perhaps can confirm. And so I want to say, yes, it's good to have this open, transparent process in GitHub to raise tickets, but we would think that it's very useful what Max Deckers presented on Tuesday, the development and implementation of a corporate reference data management, so that the European Commission itself talks to each other and tries to align already the standardization activities. Right, Mr. Hassenbach? Would you like to add something?
No, I do not have to add something, but I have to underline it. And of course, it's necessary to have for very powerful implementations. We will have, for example, in the students exchange context, but not only in the students exchange context, but also if you think about projects like the European Student Card and so on, that we do not have to develop for every purpose a different data standard, but that we can rely on what so far established and with a powerful standard. I think X-Higher Education, or I think EDCI is one of these. A lot of simplification of work can be done, and I think, as you said, the more powerful the standards are, but the less they are, the better it is.
Yeah, Thank you. And then we can concentrate on the national challenges. So we still have issues with mapping our diverse gender into the non-binary publications office gender list, or the fact that Germany doesn't have a person identifier or a student ID, which can be used along all the universities. So we still have to tackle national issues, and it could greatly help to find a bit more, a cleaner European ground. In order not to end up too pessimistic, I invite you to have a look at this video here, which I will launch now, and perhaps the ENDORSE team can provide us then the results of the poll afterwards. So thank you very much at the moment. Let's follow a transnational use case. Amelie, coming from France.
Many students change higher
Germany.
education institutions.
I will send you also the link in the chat. All of our all of our standardization activities are online, available also on YouTube. Hours and hours of standardization work. Yeah, have fun. Now let's listen to the challenge of Amelie.
Many students change higher education institutions during their studies. Of course, especially in this phase of life, plans often change, whether for a change of scene, for new horizons, or for very practical reasons. Just like for Amelie. After her bachelor's degree in France, she switches to a German university for a master's program. This is exciting for her, but also exhausting. As a student, she is fully immersed in the digital world. Shopping, ordering concert tickets, it's all done digitally. She doesn't know any different. However, when it comes to organizing the change of university, she comes across one thing again and again: paperwork. This is because there is, as yet, no digital standard for the exchange of data between universities. Even if data already exists as digital documents, they are sometimes not easily exchangeable, like when you move from another country, for example. For Amelie, even when applying online to her new university, this means typing, copy-pasting, scanning and uploading certificates and performance records as attachments. And a colossal form. The data is actually already there, and who knows if everything is transferred correctly and completely in the end. Meanwhile, work is piling up at the admissions office of Amelie's new university. Data has to be reconciled, verified, and checked for completeness. A lot of effort, together with many further inquiries. Wouldn't it be much better if the data from the existing documents, which is already available anyway, were transmitted digitally? For example, via upload or USB stick, or ideally, even directly from France to Germany? What's missing is a uniform standard. X-Higher is one such standard. It's short for Higher Education Institution Exchange. It makes it possible to transfer data between universities simply and securely. For example, personal data or certificates of achievement. This is done indirectly through documents submitted by students or directly from university to university. This means that Amelie has to type much less in her application because, for example, data from digital attachments is automatically transferred to the application. Amelie's new university can also cross-check her information with data from other registers, for example, her registered address or her insurance status with her health insurance company. This also works in the other direction, for example, to file Amelie's periods of study directly with her pension fund. The result? Amelie is able to complete her application much faster. This leaves her more time for new horizons. And the universities? Breathe. Less manual work, fewer sources of error, faster processes. Formal aspects of the application can be validated automatically, leaving more time for the manual recognition process by the officer, which will still be required. By the way, Amelie finds it up to date and quite normal. Digital, easy, and quick to do. And what she is most pleased about is that the Student Loans Office is also updated automatically. Because then, nothing gets in the way of an actual change of scenery. After her studies, online applications are also easy for Amelie. With one click, she can upload her digital degree certificate from the university portal to a job exchange, for example. And potential employers can also securely check the transmitted data and can quickly choose Amelie. That's how ex-hire even helps her to make a successful start in her professional life.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for that and for sharing the video. We're going to take a quick look at the Slido poll that you set at the very beginning. So let's have a look at the results of that Slido, please. Okay, do you know what is interoperability? Yes. People attending the ENDORSE conference certainly do know what is interoperability. The next question. Do you know what is the SDG regulation? 2/3 did indeed. 2/3 didn't and 1/3 did. Do you know what is special on education sector in Germany? That was a little bit more of a mystery to most of our participants. I guess they're not experts in the education sector in Germany. And then very, very few people knew what XHEIE was. So there you go. I think that's probably what you expected in terms of the poll, but I'm glad you gave us the opportunity to check it out. So thank you both very, very much for your presentation. We're going to take a short break now. We will be back at 2:55 for our panel discussion on connecting research and public sector data through FAIR principles. So grab a coffee, but don't go far. Welcome back. You're into our final point of the final day of the ENDORSE conference. I hope you've enjoyed everything you've heard so far. And of course, remember that those all will be available for you, recorded. So if you had to miss something because there were two tracks at the same time, don't worry, you'll be able to find it all on the website, and we'll be sharing the link before the end of today. We're going now to a panel discussion, connecting research and public sector data through FAIR principles. And to moderate that for us, we have Joke Meus from the Research Foundation of Flanders and Rafe Boel from the Flemish government. Gentlemen, are you there?
Yes, hello.
So I'm going to hand over to you to let you introduce your presentations and your panelists, and encourage people to use the Q&A for questions to you and your panelists. Enjoy the session.
Hello everybody. Many thanks for joining this roundtable. As was announced, Rav and I will be the chairs of this roundtable. And before getting started, we would like to provide you some short information on the background of the format. And can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So where is this concept coming from? Rav and I both work for the Flemish government, but in different so-called data communities. I work in the research data community and Rav in the public sector data community. And although we are facing similar tasks and puzzles, we find that there are a few policy frameworks that actually enhance or foster this practical alignment between the data communities. This does not mean, however, that there is no collaboration. In fact, there are very interesting use cases where the crossovers are successfully made in Belgium and abroad. And we find that there is much to learn from these encounters. So on how these different so the puzzles and the hurdles that are taken there to make these crossovers can be very informative for policy making. And that's why I'm trying to get along in my presentation. Yeah, so that's why we chose actually for a format, and we start off from specific use cases, and we from which we take them these findings to a next level, to a policy level. We would like to kindly invite you and invited speakers and panelists to think with us on this policy level of integrating these sectors, and as a result, we would like to provide or to have concrete priorities.
I'm sorry, Joke. Can you put your presentation on full screen? Thank you.
Yeah, sorry. It is on full screen. I then.
It's not in presentation mode, I think, Joke.
Yeah, I'm trying to do that. Okay. Is it now?
Not yet.
Seems that you're sharing, do you have two screens and maybe you're sharing the wrong screen of multiple screens?
Yes, I'm trying to switch that, but I have now not the control. Yeah, okay. Yes, sorry, it's getting stuck.
You can stop sharing and then reshare. And then
Yes.
choose the correct screen.
Is it okay now?
Yes, that did the trick. Thank you for the support. So first we'll have speakers that present specific use cases, followed by a panel that reflects upon those findings. And they will speak from the policy perspective of the domain or sector they represent. Now, in order to be able to relate everything and interconnect everything that's being said here, we ask our panelists to speak from a common framework that consists of the topics which are now presented on this slide. Now, this list of topics has been made with in collaboration with several of the panelists who are attending this round table. It doesn't pretend to be exhaustive, but it serves as a reference framework to which each participant can relate and to structure this discussion. It includes sometimes very specific issues, but it also can contain more broader issues. So before we dive into our panel, I will briefly outline the structure of the panel discussion. We start with the speakers. They speak from an applied perspective. So this means concrete use cases in which the cooperation, where you refer to, between different data communities has been successful. Next, we have our panel discussion. Now, the panel will speak from a policy perspective of the data community they represent. Third, of course, we are looking to the feedback of the audience, and therefore you can vote on the topics that you think that are most crucial or more important. And we will share them via a poll using Slido. To end, we have kind of a wrap-up where rapporteurs will formulate recommendations and points for attentions for the member states. Now, Yoko will put the slide that's now shared in the chat. So if you would have a look on the topics, you can still find them in the chat.
Okay, thank you, Raf. So we would like to announce esteemed speakers who are expert in 3 different data spaces: environment, health, and mobility. And the first speaker is Stefan Lefevre. He's technical director of City of Things at IMEC, and he's an expert in real-time data in the context of smart cities. Today, he will present us with a use case on air quality data.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. I will try to share my screen. Is my screen visible?
Not yet. Yes.
Yes, it is.
Okay. So welcome. I have, I think, around 10 minutes to talk about our experience and research in environmental data spaces, where I will talk about research that we did on air and water quality measurements and the challenges that we face there on what we call getting this data in a smart data context. So we see that a lot of data is being collected still these days in the big data context, where properties like velocity, volume, variety, veracity, all the V's are very important. But the real challenge that we face also in an environmental context is to go to make the transition to smart data management and smart data governance, where a few of the topics that we see here as smart data, which have also been prepared by the European Commission in the PES toolkit. So a lot of these topics apply on these environmental data spaces, and especially on the level of air quality. So we will talk a little bit in this presentation about the difficulties we face on making this data apply to the FAIR principles, making it also fit for purpose. And I will touch a few of these smart data challenges, like quality, where we will focus on the accuracy of air quality data, semantics, sharing air quality data in a uniform way and finding back the data. And last but not least, what can we do with this data when we have made it smart? What are the promises of using air quality data on that level? So a few of the projects are highlighted here. So we are collecting air quality data from different sources. We have mobile air quality devices, for example, here running on postal vans. You do that real time. We collect that real time data. We have one of the main topics of our research was on air quality data calibration, which I will explain in the next slide. We also have done research on how can we take mobile data sets running around in the city, and for example, with 50 sensors, how can we extrapolate this to a real-time map of the air quality data on the city using machine learning techniques, for example. Another thing we do is the same on water quality. We have a project where we want to install in Flanders around 2,000 water quality sensors. We call them cheap sensors, so that we can use the big data aspect of it. And it's another project which I will not focus on in these 10 minutes. I will focus on the air quality scope. So what is the problem with air quality data sources in an environmental data space? It is that this air quality is measured at different places by different organizations, and that it is disclosed in different ways. I have put 4 cases here with different quality levels and different organizations. In the top left corner, you have, for example, a city which is having its own air quality measurements and is publishing that data on a dashboard, for example. I call it city air quality. Or at the top right corner, we have citizen science projects, like Luftdaten is a platform where people can buy very cheap air quality sensors, and they can push it into their neighborhood, and this data is being published on a platform, a dashboard, with an API that discloses the data. On the bottom right, we have government, which is responsible to track air quality in the region and uses high quality, very expensive air quality measurement stations. And is building simulation tools and simulation models to map that macro data quality of air inside a kind of policy ready environment. And then we have, like I was saying already, we can have a city delivering air quality data and research using that data to, for example, make maps of that data, real-time maps. So lots of different activities into the air quality sensing territory, but what we lack a little bit is the quality of the data. We know, because we are in that field, that air quality sensors are not accurate. They are subject from day one to drift in the measurement of the data. So the absolute values of these air quality sensors, especially if you go to cheaper ones like used in citizen science, is not guaranteed by all means. And so if you start using difficult to interpret accuracy of quality, you're starting with a bad start, of course. Another thing is semantics. Lots of this air quality is, in air quality measurements, context is very important. Where is it measured? At what height it was measured? With what device it was measured? And not all of these suppliers of data, they supply the right context to be able to interpret the data. And then we have utility, where you have lots of these data sources which are of different origins and quality standards. How can you do something with it if you don't understand the quality, or if the disclosure is difficult? So that's the research that we have been working on. And a first one of these smart data properties was quality. So what we have done is we have pushed research into the territory of how can we make the absolute values of air quality sensors better by using algorithms, combining the different actors in the field. Like what you see here is on this graph is that the real measurements, concentrations of NO2 here at this level are in orange. And what we see with raw measurements of let's say, low-cost sensors is that, they follow a little bit the relative variations, but the absolute values are way out of limit. And every sensor has its own curve like this, its own graph. So what we have done is put some research, and you see it's a kind of data grooming machine learning research, where we use the typology of a sensor. So we take a sensor on our test bench, we look at its parameter, we see if it's calibratable, and we try to map that. We take all this data into our algorithm, and then we use high quality data from the Flemish government. I told you that they have very high quality reference stations, and we use that also into the game. And we are able, and that you see in the green curve, to come much closer in the neighborhood of the real NO2 concentrations, the real being measured by a real quality station. So what we did for that, to measure that, is we put a citizen science sensor or a commercial sensor next to a very high quality sensor. And this way we are able to track the efficiency of the calibration algorithm. And we were able to reach, with this calibration algorithm, a supplementary class. In Flanders, we have these levels of quality, and we are able to make a low-cost sensor being used, for example, in citizen science or in cities, with a calibration on top of it to supplementary level. So we have been, in our research, we have been able to address the quality, accuracy aspect of air quality, which is, of course, a huge need to be able to use that data, because the data is mostly not used because the people are not trusting its quality. So a second thing is,
Stefan, when you have less than 2 minutes left.
Okay, when you have high quality data, you can feed it, for example, into a digital twin, where you can combine it to, where we combine data from the mobility data space to simulation models on air quality. And you can use this high quality data to, let's say, calibrate your models. And this way, making policy decisions based on accurate data and between different domains makes it a kind of very good utility base. So as I have 2 minutes, I have to go faster. There are 3 topics that we are trying to address, which are at the base of these ENDORSE challenges, is alignment of metadata standards, vocabulary, semantics. We have a program in Flanders, which we call Open Standards for Linked Organizations, which is now defining, as we speak, the vocabulary of air quality, because we want all the systems in the end to, at a certain level, speak the same language and use the same vocabulary and URIs. The shared principles for data collaboration, you can have vocabularies and URIs, but you need to use them in technical systems. And these technical systems need to be able to have the right things installed to work with these kind of vocabularies and metadata. So that's why we have, at this moment of speaking, also in Flanders, a Flemish open city architecture. It's a co-creation platform where we try to put the principles of data sharing into a technical system that is interoperable. And that's also an active program. And then, of course, you have to offer your data in a kind of lovable way. And that's why the Agency of Information Flanders has made a metadata.vlaanderen.be, a kind of lovable data catalog, which makes this data also more accessible for all communities.
Okay, thank you, Stefan.
What we say?
Thank you very much. It's
Okay.
we have to round up.
Okay.
And give
Okay.
the words
Perfect.
to the next speaker.
I said what I wanted to say, so that's perfect.
Great. Thank you.
So, Stefan, thank you for these stunning examples. I would like to introduce the next speaker, Carlos Para Calderon. He's the head of the technological innovation at the Andalusian Health Service and head of research and innovation in the Institute of Biomedicine at Seville. Now, today he will shed light on experiences from his position as consortium coordinator in the Fair for Health. It's a project that focuses on open exchange of health data. Carlos, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the ENDORSE conference, to the opportunity to present the project or experience in the context of the interest of this conference today. Okay, my presentation, the title is The FAIR Principle as a Guide to Making True the European Health Data Space, and from electronic health record to open health research in Europe. Okay, the line of the presentation is that I start with a summary of the Fair for Health project. This project started at the end of 2018 and will finish at the end of this year, 2021. And now we are in the last part of the project. And the second part of my presentation is related of this use cases is in the context of the conference, our experience in the project related to the benefits of applying FAIR principles. I use the other understanding of FAIR principles related to the filing for artificial intelligence. Really is not original for me. I listen for one relevant person in the EOS context. Also, I speak about the how less taken. Finally, I present and show some remaining challenges from my point of view related to the context of health data to apply FAIR principles. And finally, I present one relevant experience we develop now parallel to the FAIR for Health projects is related to our relevant standards in healthcare domain, HL7 standards, and we work in this organization to implement, to develop one implementation guide related to how can apply FAIR principles in the context of this standard. Fair for Health project is one European project funded by Horizon 2020. The consortium is a big consortium with 3 partners out of European Union, and it's led by the Andalusian Health Service. In this case, specifically in the biggest hospital in Andalusia, Virgen del Rocío University Hospital. I work in the hospital and also in the Institute of Biomedicine Seville. Okay, very relevant in this project. We work with 2 main kind of health data. 2 big electronic health records directly. In this case, the electronic health record of my hospital, Virgen del Rocío University Hospital, and the electronic health record of Hospital of Geneva, and other kind of health research data. Okay, in other 6 health research data sets. The objectives of the project is to facilitate and encourage the European Union health research community to verify, share, and reuse that the data set derived from policy-funded research initiative. But in our case, it's not only about policy-funded research initiative, because we use also electronic health records, the record directly used for the healthcare activity. And we have 4 specific objectives to develop in the project. Design and implement outreach strategy, produce a set of guidelines for a fair data certification roadmap, develop and validate fair for health platform and fair for health agents, and demonstrate the potential impact in health research and health outcomes through the evaluation of 2 pathfinder case studies, use case. We work in 2 specific use cases in the project to demonstrate 2 innovative digital health service fair basis. The first is related to health research, clinical research in this case, to support the discovery of disease, onset triggers, and disease association patterns in comorbid patients. We work in the context of chronic patients, and demonstrate the reproducibility of research is other important concept to take account in our project, not only fair principle, also the reproducibility. And the second use case is a digital healthcare service. In this case, to develop and pilot a digital prediction service for 30 days readmission risk in patients with COPD. COPD is chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, in 2 scenarios in our hospital in the case of Serbia. We implement 1 specific verified workflows in Go Fair basis. It is very close. Our main reference for this is Go Fair, and we contextualize the verification workflow in our project. We have a 1 open access publication related to this process, and we in our context is very important the task related to the identification or anonymization data and so on. Our technological solution use the concept of privacy preserved distributed data mining. It's very important, and it's a specification related to the federated analysis. Our idea is no share data, is share algorithms. And also in our case, we show data related only of metadata. Our idea is show metadata in the context of EOS platform, but the real data is restricted because we work in the context of real healthcare providers. We have a lot of problems to share. Okay, and for us it's important the relationship is 1 objective of the project. I work very close to Research Data Alliance, European Open Science Cloud, GoFair, and very recently the new Healthy Cloud project related to develop a strategy agenda to European Open Data Space, Health Data Space, sorry. Related to the benefits of applying fair principles to health data, we will demonstrate we use fair data. We prepare data to make a good artificial intelligence process. We have a lot of knowledge of the problems with the health data related to the quality, related to the missing, the big problems related to the interoperability. But we try to demonstrate in this case how if we use fair principles, we can apply all the potential of the big data and artificial intelligence to use this data to improve the knowledge, to improve the research in health domain.
2 minutes left.
Yes. Very important is the problems related to dataset and ethical legal uses, but the use of federal technologies is improved a lot and facilitate the adoption of this kind of technology by part of the healthcare providers. We identify the problem related to the strong dependence of the semantic domain of health. We need use ontologies, we need use standardized guides for the uniform structure. And in this case, we work finally in this context of the HL7 standardization organization to develop one implementation guide to use the more famous and more use standard in the health domain, HL7 FHIR currently, and we use FHIR to apply FAIR principles in the context of healthcare domain and also to prepare data to health research. And that's all for my part. Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity.
Okay, many thanks. That was very interesting. I'm happy to announce now George Yanis, who's professor in traffic and safety engineering at the National Technical University of Athens. He has a particular focus on data management and analysis in the mobility domain, and it's in this context that he will present a use case.
Thank you very much. I'm sharing my screen.
Yeah.
You see my screen now?
Yes. Yes. Thank you.
So today we're going to have a quick look on FAIR challenges in transport open science. In fact, transport research and transport data are highly diverse in content structure, use, and degree of openness. And we have to consider that when we're talking about transport, we cover all transport modes, from road, rail, maritime, air, and combined transport, and all transport types. Transport of persons and goods, urban, interurban transport, national, European, international, different operations and services. So one can easily see the need for working on data in terms of intra-sector benefits within transport, but also extra-sector transport with all other economic and social sectors. Transport domains themselves differ significantly in the data they collect, how they refer to the data, the analysis they perform, and in their views on open data. Some sectors are fully private, like air transport, and some others are fully public, like public transport, urban public transport. So there are so many different views, and so at the end of the day, so many different business models in developing and exploiting data. We have been working on open science and open data within the Be Open Horizons 2020 project, where it is a CSA, a coordination and support action aiming to capitalize upon existing initiatives enabling open science in transport, facilitating a common understanding among actors, and to monitor progress in order to facilitate continuous improvements in open science exploitation in the transport sector. And on that purpose, we developed the Topos Observatory. You see the address at the very top, toposobservatory.eu. It is a website operational already some months ago, started operation, and now it provides a wealth of data and knowledge in terms of transport science, available openly to everybody, in a way applying the FAIR principle in the particular transport research area. So please visit it And one can use it not only as a very useful transport research source, but also as an example of applying FAIR principles in transport research. We have to identify the transport within this work. Transport research data are within three pillars: original transport research data from different field operation tests, naturalistic driving, research results and models; operational data from public and private operators directly related to research; and also data from published research presented in journals, conferences, etc. We have made a thorough analysis of the different competence areas: legal, regulatory, technological, transport planning, business modeling, socioeconomic and environmental, together with the different types of data: original research data, operational data, and data published, combining the different types of stakeholders, but also the different modes of transport. So it is a mega matrix highlighting the complexity, but also a canvas and a roadmap for working on open data in transport. The benefits of data sharing identified concern to facilitating research across communities, but especially on the transport sector, where public and private stakeholders are working together, both in terms of business and operations, but also in terms of data. So it is the ideal case to build business models of public-private partnerships. And of course, there is the benefit of reduction of funding and effort requirements for development and operation of transport systems. So it's not only the development, not only the operation, it's both, and the related services. Strengthen the capabilities and capacities to gather intelligence and foster transparency and innovation in the new digital transport era. So there is no real transport sector and subsector without data and without innovation today. So open data and open science will certainly boost the digital transport future. We have identified quite a few challenges in transport data sharing in terms of sociocultural, technological, political, organizational, economic, and legal. And we have put all this into various canvas and analysis matrices, like the one we see with the different challenges, opportunities, and barriers for the different types of stakeholders: researchers, research institutions, public transport companies and organizations, and private transport companies and organizations, where one can see that there are quite a few common challenges, opportunities, and barriers, and quite a few diverse challenges, opportunities, and barriers. We carried out a thorough Delphi survey on these challenges, opportunities, and barriers. And key areas identified concern the legal and ethical issues with the GDPR, privacy issues, intelligence, intellectual property rights, and both research institutions and transport companies put it high in their concerns. Lack of skilled personnel was also highlighted as a key finding, a key challenge for everybody involved in transport. And of course, key concern was the commercial competition, especially for the private transport companies. The requirements for open transport science, of course, concern the application of fair data, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, ensure data quality in terms of relevance, accuracy, credibility, timeliness, accessibility, interpretability, and coherence. And then, of course, we are talking for a technical sector, transport, where you cannot operate, you cannot really provide services without standards, without high quality metadata and appropriate formats which will allow the communication between stakeholders, private and public. Of course, we need appropriate infrastructure services and, of course, data management plans to integrate and make smooth the communication and the flow of data. In conclusion, open science could increase the current great potential of transport systems, both in terms of new infrastructure, services, governance, with more data and knowledge and broader geographical coverage. Data sharing will allow the verification of the scientific results, foster collaborations among researchers, and promote more public-private partnerships. And the further work needs to be done in setting standards and understanding the needs of related stakeholders. Finally, of course, a top-down approach is always a requirement. Key policy issues are needed to be tackled. We cannot work without governance and appropriate governance and framework concerning the conditions in which data are provided, curated, maintained, and accessed, highlighting the need for new and innovative business models. We cannot talk about traditional way of handling data and knowledge in the new digital era. Only new and innovative business models is the key to exploit fully the potential of open science and open data in transport. I think I close with this last quote, and thank you very much, and ready to contribute further into the discussion.
Thank you, Jorge, for this eloquent presentation. I'll check with Joke. Joke, do you have time for one panel question?
Yes, we have time for one question.
Shall we delve into the question to Stefan? And there I see there's a question, is there access available to the sensor data or only to the visualization, Stefan?
Yeah, of course, I answered already a little bit in the chat. It's essential that data is getting out of the scope of visualizations, because otherwise it's not findable. So we will, in the context of the CEF ODALA project, we will publish this data into the EU Open Data Portal. So there will be access to the data itself. That's clear.
Okay, thank you very much for this quick answer. We have...
Yeah, we can have also in relation to digital health. Is there an issue with open science being leveraged into closed IP protected technology by for-profit entities? Is this fair?
It's for me, the question.
Yes.
The question is relevant. My opinion is that the technology was born in the context of open science. It should not be IP protected. It is my opinion. But in any case, the deploy of this kind of technology can deploy for companies, private companies, with a sustainable and legitimate business model, not related to license and other kind of model, because the companies need one sustainability model to grow and develop his activity.
Okay, thank you for this answer. I would like to thank the speakers, but the audience as well, for their interactivity. Now,
you can always put your questions in the chat. Then our speakers can look at this, and if they have time for it to answer, it would be great. Thank you.
So now I would like to welcome our panel. Please, panelists, switch your cameras on. Now, as mentioned before, our panel will speak from a policy perspective of the data community they represent. Now, we ask our panelists to prioritize 2 topics and elaborate on its practical implementation. We have 3 panelists representing the research data and public sector data communities. So our first panelist is Sarah Jones. Sarah is the EOSC Engagement Manager at GAIA and Acting Director of EOSC Association. From the perspective of the European Open Science Clouds, she will give us an insight into possible actions that foster cross-sector collaborations. We're looking forward to your first priority. We have to time box this although to 5 minutes, but in a second round, we will delve into your next priority. Sarah, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you very much, Raf. So for anyone who isn't aware, the European Open Science Cloud is an initiative led by the European Commission, which is federating infrastructure across all different research communities. And I've put a link to the EOSC PID policy in the chat because this is the first priority that I've picked out of that list, having a shared system for unique persistent identifiers across sectors. So as part of the EOS governance, we had a working group that looked at the use of PIDs in various different communities and developed a policy and also recommendations on the PID architecture. And we're now at the phase of implementing that. So I wanted to elaborate on, the use of PIDs within this context and what gaps there are in terms of the infrastructure and services. So we have a range of persistent identifiers for many different entities within EOSC, identifiers for individuals, for projects, for all of the objects that we're sharing within the EOSC context. So research data, code, publications, and there are identifiers for institutions as well. And for each of these types of persistent identifiers, there are a range of PID providers. So when we think about our own identity, many researchers will have an ORCID ID, they probably have a Google ID, they've probably got single sign-on using a protocol like EDUGAIN. So there are many different identities that could exist for the same entity. So we need to obviously know where there is a match there. We need to know that, my ORCID ID links with my institutional credentials for single sign-on. So we need all of these different PID services to be interoperable with each other. And that's the major challenge that we face within EOSC. And there are 2 main pieces of work that I think will help us to address that. So we want a common API to interact with PIDs to allow people to perform whatever actions they need to on their persistent identifiers, whether that's creating them, resolving them, modifying the basic information that you're pointed to when you follow that PID. And this is something that should be offered by all PID service providers. So we need those different organizations that are, the DOI Foundation, ORCID, and others to come together to work on that common API and to be able to support it. Because then we can build, the architecture and services that are needed to join up across all of the different identifiers. So really what we want within EOSC is a global lookup service, a kind of meta PID resolver, so that we're able, to follow all of those relevant links and to understand what individuals or data or services we're linking to. And there's a lot of work done through the likes of OpenAir and other EOSC services on developing a PID graph. So we can also understand those different identifiers in context and see the linkage between them. So you can understand what data or information an individual researcher has made available, how that links to other groups and other objects within the EOSC. So all of this really requires a lot of collaboration between the different PID service providers and the authorities that are making sure that we have globally unique identifiers. And we need to make sure that they are persistent and stable, that we're not changing the syntax of the PID, we're not reassigning PIDs, and that what we resolve to is clear, which version and which object it is. So we need very well governed and sustainable services. And I think a lot more investment is needed in that infrastructure and service layer to make sure that we can utilize the PID ecosystem effectively. I hope that's within 5 minutes.
Yes,
Yep.
it was brilliant in time and stunning pitch. So, Joke?
Yeah, I will introduce Sadia van Kouwenberg, is Head Information Management and Data Analysis at U Hasselt and Ecom Belgium. She's president of Eurocris, which is an international non-profit association that brings together experts on research information in general and research information systems in particular. Sadia, can we have insight in your priority?
Yeah, thank you, Ilke. So the thing I picked actually was the one on metadata and semantics. So what you have with the metadata is they should be highly interoperable. And when going through the discussions on interoperability, you most of the time hear people talking about, first of all, the technical interoperability. The question would be actually whether this would be a start point or rather an end point, because would technical interoperability be enough? I think from the discussion today and the previous days, it's very clear that it's obviously not the case. So technical interoperability just won't do it, won't make it. So beyond that, you would, next to the computational interoperability, you would also need linguistic, semantic interoperability from the people that are actually using the data and the metadata. Because if you want to have data quality, you have to ensure that everybody understands exactly what it needs. So there should be somewhere a uniform interpretation that's required by the information providers as well as the information consumers. And that is not obvious in a consistent way over so many areas, actually, like the data spaces are. So the thing is then, what can you do actually to grow towards such a semantic, linguistic, and computational interoperability standard? So the thing is there not to rely solely on techniques, but actually to get the actual community involved. That would actually help. And if you would be able to start from there, then you could go down layer by layer and then start to draw the technical interoperability from that. And that's basically, to some extent, what Eurocris as an organization is doing. So for instance, we make a metadata standard for research information. We're sharing it actually worldwide. So this standard is being adopted in every part of the world at this point in time. And we team up highly with the research management community for doing that. So we're actually putting the hand and reaching the hand with the research management administrators, and we're trying to know what they're actually doing, how they're handling their processes, because this directly will relate actually how they will build their information, how they will store it, because it's also aligned to their context, to the process they will manage. And based on that, we are trying to draft, together with many experts throughout the world, to build a conceptual high-level information model. And once this is drafted, then we can try to start to include technical people from that. But actually, the first step is, most of the times, should actually be a discussion with the people that are actually handling the data, so the business experts, let's say. Then you would actually have to translate it to a logical data model with entities, attributes, and relationships being modeled. And then, based on that, this should not be the endpoint. That would also be something I really would like to say and put here out today, because it's not only about the metadata standard, it's also about adoption and the way how people are adopting basically the standard. So once you have that standard, don't end the story. Continue to follow it up, how people are being using and adopting it, but also make business rules and validation rules actually that are checking whether people are still adhering to the model itself. If you would do that, you would be able to have more qualitative data, I guess. So then we come down, is the metadata standard enough already? Do we need more than that? Should it only be about the data? Then I would also say again, no, I don't think so. I think it also should be, for instance, on the classifications that you're building in order to check for which data are relevant to yourself. So also on the classifications that are not just merely codes that you're using. It are codes with a highly relevant contextual meaning. So if you would, for instance, compare this to a text pay letter, you would also not only use the codes and then leave it up to there. I think everybody understands that we really need these definitions there in order to get some sense out of the data. And this is exactly what also being dealt with if you have data being combined. If you want to ensure that you find valuable data, then at least make sure that the contextual information is there in doing so. That was my point, Joka. So I can give the word back to you.
Okay, thank you, Salia. Raf, will you introduce Robert Krimmer?
Yes, Silke, thank you. So I would like to introduce Robert Krimmer, who is an ERA Chair Professor of e-governance at the University of Tartu. Now, Robert's research focuses on digital transformation, cross-border e-government services, electronic participation, and democracy, and e-voting as well, and all issues with regard to further developing a digital society. From this perspective, he will be speaking as a representative of the public sector data. Robert, we're looking forward to your priority. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Raf. Can you hear me all?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Fantastic. Yeah, no, it would be just really bad if I will go on and then you tell me you're muted. Yeah, so, you know, the new modern word in the Zoom world. Anyway, I'm not a Zoomie yet today on Friday, although it's one of many meetings, including our conference. But it really already shows our digital world. And in our digital world, the one thing that we don't want to see is exactly this, it's paper, right? So essentially what I've been researching on and working on is to build a federation of federations, to build a data exchange network that will actually allow us to do what researchers in the area of public sector information, of digital transformation of the public sector, of e-governance, so to speak, have been dreaming about for almost 20 years. They have realized that basically once you provide information in catalogs, once you're providing transformative services such as e-taxation, e-voting, or other elements, you actually need to start integrating services in sectors, but also cross-sector. And what we are doing right now, talking on a European level, essentially at one point in time, which hopefully will be December 2023, a cross-border dimension. So actually creating a European digital single market that the European Commission is working so hard on. And what we need for that is really having that data infrastructure that allows us to share that data easily. We see those developments already happening on national level, whether that is in Estonia or in Slovenia or other areas where those data exchange layers exist, which immediately allow to provide those integrated services like live event-driven public services. Those are that really connect different sectors. And having that now for the European realm, that is what is currently being in the works. And we have worked in the TOP project, the once only principal project, on providing a first version of that. And it's actually going to be taken up as part of the Single Digital Gateway Regulation, which, as I mentioned before, will come live in December 2023, where a set of 21 different services, starting from providing information about proof of your birth, over registering companies as a daughter company abroad, going into areas such as registering employment, but also moving from one country to the other, being able to be provided completely paperless, right? And that, of course, builds upon the principles that were already mentioned before, meaning interoperability on a technical level, but even more so, importantly, on a governance level, really, which enables at one point in time that public authorities and end users will trust that information. And similarly, following also the FAIR principle, what is essential is the possibility for the data endpoint, the data user, to understand how their data is being handled, meaning also being compliant with the GDPR, meaning that data protection is ensured across the line from the beginning to the end, meaning the consent of the end user of the data subject, including a possible preview of the data to be shared. So in a sense, we are soon to experience this integrated European data space, you could call it, this European digital single market. And contributing to that is really what we have been working on in our research project, but also, I mean, it was not a research project, it was an innovation project, bringing public sector together, and with that, actually bringing Europe together. And with that, thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you, Robert, for your eloquent pitch. Yoga, are there any questions in the chat related to the pitch of Robert?
Late in the
I
afternoon.
haven't.
If not, then we jump to the next priority, and therefore I would like to give the floor again to Sarah Jones.
Yeah,
And maybe
excellent.
feel free to ask each other questions. We have the time,
Yeah.
thanks to your very well-timed pitches.
Excellent. Sure, will do. Well, actually, I'm going to build on a little bit of what Sadia had said. So the other priority I'd picked out was about the alignment of metadata standards and semantics and having shared infrastructure and catalogs. That's one of the core objectives within EOSC. And again, I pasted a link to one of our recommendation documents, the EOSC Interoperability Framework, in the chat, because that's really the way that we're trying to build the glue and implement FAIR within the EOS context. And Sadia had asked, is technical interoperability enough? And no, it's not. What we'd addressed in there was technical, legal, organizational, and semantic interoperability. And it's the semantic aspects that I think are really critical when we're trying to federate research data from different communities. And I completely agree with her point that you need to get the community involved, because there are so many domain standards and we need to work with those communities and look at the mappings and the parallels from the standards that come from different domains. So within EOSC, FAIR is kind of core to the implementation, and the FAIR principles really emphasize the importance of standards, not just for finding research data, but also for the reuse. So we need that rich metadata, and I think this is why it's really important that we have standards in those different research communities, because there are different research practices and different types of variables and information that they need to capture and interrogate to do the research. So the issue we face is just really the number of metadata standards and ontologies and controlled vocabularies, and how we try and bring those together in a coherent way. One of the key pieces of work we've been doing within EOSC is trying to define a minimal metadata framework that allows us to develop crosswalks between the most commonly used standards. And this is really a key aspect in the federation of the datasets from the different repositories and research infrastructures. And there's been work done in various projects on that in FAIR's FAIR. I know Eva Mendes has been doing some work there, but also through Research Data Alliance groups and other initiatives. And this will be one of the key pieces of work to define that framework and to also test and validate that with the communities. And in order to, to properly utilize the metadata, we need clear, publicly available definitions for those different metadata schemas and all the concepts. And within the interoperability framework, we also called for permissive licenses for the metadata. So ideally, we'd like metadata available under a CC0 license so that we can utilize it in the most free way so that we can bring together all of those descriptions. But I think that discovery layer is just one aspect of the puzzle. We obviously need to support that kind of community use of the data as well. So in the interoperability framework, we talk about having repositories of semantic artifacts so that we're going beyond the basic discovery into the meaning of the data. And there's an interesting work going on through the Co-Data initiative on the system of units and looking at how we can match units from different communities and see where they're talking about the same aspects. There are some examples that have been done in previous EOSC projects. The B2 Share repository, for example, which is led by the UDAT initiative, it's a generic repository and it uses generic standards, but it's also matched to different community metadata and integrated resources from the likes of the International Virtual Observatory in astronomy, so that that's available in the cross search, but we also have all of the astronomy and the community level metadata available. And I think that that's really critical, that it's, we're still supporting the community practice while we're trying to bring things together. And the other point I'd just like to flag here about metadata and semantics is that not every community has existing standards. And I think there's still a lot of work that's needed to support these where they don't already exist. And, looking at the current framework program that should be released soon and the new work program, there should be projects that support that interoperability across different domains. So I look forward to seeing that happening too. I think that's all I'll say on this matter. Hand over to Jill.
Yes, Sarah. I would also like to know, you say this data standards, metadata standards should be elaborated in the different research communities. Do you think it's important that they also engage with policy data spaces so that you have policymakers and researchers collaborating on those, or should it come from researchers?
I think the standards development is best done at the community level. So within the research communities, they understand their practices best and, what it is that they need to understand and use about the data sets. So really that's where the standard should be formed. But I think it's good that standards are formed with policy maker insights as well, or in, more global forums. So using initiatives like CoData or RDA so that we aren't doing things in a silo or in a vacuum, and you can learn across different communities. So when astronomy, for example, had developed all of its essentially interoperability framework, its standards, its practices for when data would be shared and how other communities could learn from that. So I think it's still good to get insights from the kind of policy level as well. I'm just looking at the chat. I think there's a couple of links and questions. So I see Max Deckers has put, about DCAT and the B2 Share repository that I'd mentioned. Yeah.
And a question from Slido. It looks like STEM is well covered. Is there also a place for the arts sector in this?
Yeah, so personally, I think that's a very important sector. My background's arts and humanities, and I think it's one of the areas that's often less funded and, doesn't have the same resources to develop its standards. But there are lots of useful initiatives out there, like Daria, for example, and a lot of the work that's gone on through Europe, like Europeana, to try and bring together cultural heritage data. So I think there is definitely a place, but we do need to make sure that isn't overlooked as we build initiatives like EOSC. We need to make sure we're representing all the communities.
Exactly. Okay, thank you, Sarah. Sadia, we would like to hear about your second priority.
Yeah, my second priority basically is on data quality. Data quality, what it actually means and what people do think about it. So what data quality actually is about is data that is fit for the purpose in a given context. What we're actually doing here, if you're building data spaces, you're building data spaces, but you're not really sure about a given context that you will be using your data for. So that makes it all quite tricky. So what do we need then as criteria to define the data quality? So you could have, for instance, the FAIR indicators. This could be used. But if you also would have, if you also followed the talk of George, you would see that the FAIR indicators are sometimes that you should go beyond that. For instance, you should take into account credibility, security, timeliness, credibility, coherence, I think he recalled. So this is more than just being fair. So it's also about the intrinsic quality, it's the contextual quality, it's the representationalness of the data, and it's about the access. And there have been many studies about that. And in order to ensure that we have that, I think there are 4 elements that we have to take into account. And the one that is being presented today most often, and also in the previous days, is the metadata that are associated with the data. There was a lot of discussion going on that. A lot of discussions also on the standards, and then there were ways actually that were in search for how you could do this actually based on an international level. So there should be initiatives, there should be some funding also for that, because it's not merely about the building of the metadata standards, it's also about the discussion or how to get to a metadata standard. Secondly, what I would also be would I would also like to put forward is the processes involved in data handling. In the registration, the organization, the use and the reuse, they are most of the times not so, I mean, mostly forgotten, while these are actually the ones that determine your quality of your data itself. So thirdly, the context of the organization is really essential. Also, for instance, the legal framework is also something we should take into account, and that is also quite often not as easily associated. Yet, when you really want to start diving into the data and you want to make some use of it, this is something that's really valuable to have it, and it should be, and I mean, it should be in place before you even get to start to do this. And the fourth thing, which also is very valued, is if you want to have data quality, is that you have trained people, skilled people, not only that know how to handle the data, to register the data, but also how to retrieve data, how to use data, and how to follow up on data quality. This is also something that is not most of the times not so easily said. So that you need some skills, yes, but that you also need skills to follow up on data quality later on. This is also something essential. And also within the frame of EOSC, there was a working group skills and training, which I also took part in, that has a manual actually on these skills. This is something that's really valuable and that should be in every policy on data, basically, that you really need the skills. So that would be basically my recommendation. So please don't take it only to metadata standards and quality, but make sure that the processes and trainings are also in place. Giving back to
Thank you, Sadia, for your second point. Joke, do you know, do you have time for the questions or the discussion that's on the chat right now?
Yes, we have some time.
Can you briefly introduce the topic to the panel?
Well, there is a comment from Mark Portier in Slido. So the PID community could also use explicit semantics of their own workings, since assumptions differ between providers.
I think that's a good point. Yeah, they will operate different policies. They'll handle versioning in different ways. So I think in all of these cases, it needs to be very explicit what are providers doing and how they're working. And this is why within the PID policy, we also have a section on, roles and responsibilities, so that we can try and be clearer about what's needed for PID services, and what kind of level of maturity they would need to be part of the EOSC. Because I think it's, especially when you're working in something like that, the name persistent is in the title of persistent identifiers. We need to make sure that there's a robustness of the service providers and also a good understanding of how they work and what the guarantees are.
Okay.
And then there was also a question, thank you, Sarah, for Sadia, communicating data quality. Are there best schema for communicating data quality or its sub-aspects?
So regarding to me, actually, one of the best works on data quality is the one of Jaran. He published in 2016 the Data Quality Handbook. And that is a very elaborate handbook on what aspects would be relevant there. Is there a schema? I don't really know whether there would be, but rather there should be a focus on trying to check actually whether data is qualitative or not. And there are methods to do that. For instance, you could draw, for instance, a rule-based checking on that, which could be done if you knew the semantics, if you knew the context, then you would be able to draft some business rules and you could implement some validation rules actually on the logical level of your data. So that would be something that would be worthwhile on checking. So I would rather focus on that, having the schema, the quality measures actually in mind in the total picture.
So Robert, do you have any thoughts about this point?
Not immediately. I mean, I would say for me, the trust is really going to be the one thing that's going to be key to any success of data sharing in this cross-border, because what we see is when we test out all the technical interoperability, as has been said before, that's all fine, that works, that's good. But when it then goes back on the level of the people that need to deal with that data, they will always start like, oh, it's great that I can get that data, but how can I be sure that this is actually accurate data, that this data has been generated in the same way that I would expect it to be done, right? So creating that trust is essentially going to be the important element, because only if the people have the feeling that all the others live up to their minimum standards, what the other side is expecting, then this exchange will also take place on a day-to-day basis, and not only on a, oh, but yeah, I can do it technically, but I would still prefer that you send it to me on paper because that has the necessary stamps that I trust, whether that is an apostille or other means. So developing that trust, that is really the key.
Okay, thank you, Robert, for your insights. And we can immediately delve into your second priority.
Yeah. So I would really say for these elements around that is really the key on building that trust, right? So for the levels, on the one hand side, really making sure that you test the different systems together well enough. That is one key, to have the data providers and the data consumers working together. That's really the first essential element. But then having them understand that the other side is really also contributing to your goals in the same way as you would expect that to be. That's really an important element there. And once we get to that, then we will also be able to create the university space that we need for that. I mean, think about university diplomas to be shared. Yeah, so you not only need to understand what is the other side providing, but also that you can use that data in an appropriate manner.
Okay, thank you, Robert. We have a question from Stefan Lefevre from IMEC. So he completely
he agrees.
Yeah, he completely agrees.
It was not a question. It was just a complete
a comment. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you relate it to the case that you presented, Stefan?
Yes, indeed. So I talked about the utility of a digital twin, an open urban digital twin, which is a kind of, we see that as a federated smart data platform, and where you have to be able to treat different sets of data. For example, if you have a simulation model that is using data to train the model, and you have the output of that model, which is another type of asset and another type of interaction of data providers in a kind of different trustworthy relationship, you need to be able to identify, let's say, identify in a vocabulary also these data, the verifiable data organizations. You need to be able to map them on the right causes. Otherwise, you can never create this kind of tools like digital twins, which can use all of this organizational data in the right context and with the right things. So I think trust is one of the most important relations also in this data quality management.
Sarah and Sadia, did you have any reflection on trust?
No, just agreeing that it's very critical. So trust in many senses, of the objects of the data, the quality of that we can, trust that, the services. I actually think in terms of the EOS context, the trust that's kind of hardest to form and build is across all of the different stakeholders, because it's such a large initiative. It brings together the political dimension, all of the different member states and the Commission, and then all of the entities that are engaged in research from different research communities. And I think when you have so many, different groups coming together, it can be hard to get people on the same page and to build that trust. So I think that community building angle is actually probably the most challenging one for us.
Okay, thank you, Sarah.
To follow up also a question I think maybe suitable for Robert also about private players. They are currently only providing some tools and competences maybe, but how can they be actually engaged in the fields?
So, I mean, of course, that is always the difficult element here. I mean, I think private players can equally as public players participate in this data space, respectively, in this data exchange that is taking place, but they need to be qualified, right? So by qualified, I mean that you actually allow them into the network, and that can be either by complying to the way that they're handling the data, or also that they fulfill the role that is expected from that network. Yeah, so why is that important? Because once you join the network, then anyone in the network actually essentially can use their data, respectively also the other way around, that they are actually eligible participants in the network. So one of the critical parts of this data sharing network that we're working on is actually to provide a list of membership in this network that also includes quality criteria for them. And once you're part of that network, then essentially you're participating. And then it doesn't matter whether you're a private player or a public player, you need to comply with the same standards, essentially. And that has to do actually also with the different ways that the data spaces are organized in the European realm. Sometimes it actually is private players that also fulfill public roles, but that depends on the concrete use case.
Okay, thank you, Robert.
Very quickly, Sarah or Sadia, on the private players. 1 minute left.
So, I mean, within the concept of EOSC, we have, core provision, which is really supported by the big E infrastructures to enable us to federate data and services. But there is this notion of a marketplace. And the idea there is to try and, I think EOSC should become a viable and attractive prospect to private players, because there's a market there for their services, and there's a wealth of data and research communities. So I think it's, it should be open, and hopefully will be attractive to private players as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the, I would like to thank the panel for the discussion. And Yoga, I think we should jump to the next section of our round table.
Exactly. I agree, Raf. Stunning panel discussion. Thank you very much. I'm trying to share my screen now. For a poll, we would like to get some input now for the audience. We had some questions, but we would also like to have your opinion through this poll. These are the same topics that were presented to the speakers and to the panelists. And can you please indicate your priority? So what is most important to foster research data and public sector data integration and exchange, considering the things you have heard today? Oh, Mother, there is a problem. People are starting to vote. Raf, did you put in the chat?
Yes, it's already in the chat.
Okay.
Is the code working? I'm getting there's no such event active right now as a warning message when I try 67905. Oh, but somebody's voted, so it must work for some.
Yeah, if you get a link, you should accept, I think, because there is a warning that it's not from the ENDORSE conference. So normally it should work.
It's in the chat that Annie mentioned that it's also not working for her.
Okay, but we will leave the poll open, and maybe Raf can, in the meantime, check present the last speakers, the rapporteurs.
Okay,
and I will try to solve. Yeah.
All right. So the rapporteurs will follow up on the talking points of the speakers and the panel, as well as the priorities, which will be filled out by the audience in the poll. So while the answers are coming in, I would like to introduce our rapporteurs. I would like to start with Professor Søren Au, Professor of Data Science and Digital Libraries at Leibniz Universität Hannover, and also the director of the Technische Informationsbibliothek TIB. Our second panelist is Eva Mendels. Eva is Associate Professor at the University Carlos III de Madrid. She is a member of the high-level advisory group of the European Open Science Policy Platform, as well as of the Open Knowledge Foundation. So, Joke, do you see the answers coming in on the poll? Yeah, I see some moving.
Yes, there is a clear winner, I would say. Alignment of metadata standards for vocabularies and semantics. Next, shared infrastructures and metadata catalogs, and shared system for unique and persistent identifiers across sectors. But answers are still coming in. Maybe it's good now to give the word to Søren. Do you agree with this poll? What are your takeaways and recommendations?
Yeah, thank you very much. Of course, I agree that metadata standards, vocabulary semantics is a very important topic. But I would like to add maybe one aspect, which I find also very important. That's that we do small incremental steps in the development and involve users on the way. And that's, of course, challenging. And I think we need to follow maybe a bit like this crowdsourcing approach or expert sourcing approach, that we involve them in the process of, for example, alignments of vocabulary development. If we look, the most successful vocabulary is schema.org. And if you look a bit at the development process, that's done on GitHub, and everybody can post some issues or suggestions. And it also evolved. In the beginning, I think it was a project which was done by Ramatan Guha over a weekend, and it was very coarse-grained and not very elaborate. But then step by step over the years, it evolved a lot, and it became a huge vocabulary for describing e-commerce and data on the web. And I think these iterative, small, agile developments process, that's something which we should consider more carefully, and also making the barriers for involving users and stakeholders, we should lower them as much as possible. That's another aspect which I find very important. So think about how can we involve them so they don't feel it as an additional burden, or how can we stress aspects which benefit researchers. For example, if we talk about open science, which directly benefit researchers. We heard a lot about PIDs, for example, and interoperability framework from Sarah Jones, for example, in the context of the EOSC. This is, of course, all very important. But if I talk to the different professors at our different faculties at the university, and I tell them for an hour about PIDs, I think they will throw me out of the room. So we need to have some things which convince them. For example, how can we connect electronic lab notebooks to such data repositories and equip the data with vocabularies and create more of these kind of best practices, or also tools which support them. And showing directly the benefits to the researchers, that's another very important aspect from my perspective. Of course, organizing, making the infrastructure interoperability is very important, but I think we need to hide this a bit from our audience and from the stakeholders, because they are more interested in doing their research, or if you talk about open government data, citizens are interested in having high quality services, or public administrators in providing these services. So we need to stress aspects which benefit them directly. And sometimes my impression is this is a bit lost in the discussion. We focus a lot on the foundations, but we should stress also more these use cases and the stakeholder orientation. Yeah, so data quality was another important topic raised by Sadia, and I also agree the approach of integrating maybe data quality measures, directly associating it with the data, is a very good strategy. There are also standards like RDF data shapes, for example, Shackle, which can be used for expressing such constraints, and we should make more use of them. Maybe also directly when we develop vocabularies, that we at the same time develop corresponding quality measures as well. Yeah, maybe that's for now from my side, and I guess Eva has a lot of additional points to add.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for having the honor of being one of the rapporteurs. I love to work with Soren. We didn't talk even in the chat, but we agree. So I will try to aggregate to have some more on the discussion. What I heard, I will start just making a brief report of what I heard. In the first part of the panel of the presenters, I heard about different fields and with the perspective of public sector information and with the perspective of the research data. But my feeling is at the end, and I went to one of my past slides in 2018 when it was about 2017 when it was about getting reviewed the public sector information directive. And I found out that I agree upon what we are doing now is what I was saying in 2017, that at the end, the public sector information is kind of a value for research. It doesn't matter if the data are on purpose done for research, or you use transport data from mobile devices to do research. So at the end, the public sector information is kind of a big opportunity for research. And all the way around, the data that they are produced specifically from the research, they can be part of the public sector information data. So I'm very happy that finally the public sector information directive was reviewed, and we are all here discussing fair data, because the fair data, they are applied to the public sector information and also to the research data. And also, I heard about in the first part about standards, but everybody speak about their own standards, which is something that I have been discussing for years and years, that the metadata or the standards, everybody thinks that they are a very good idea. It's like a toothbrush, that everybody thinks that it's a very good idea, but everybody wants to use their own. So at the end, it's a question that in the health research, we use HL fire. In this context of transport, we use this. In the environment kingdom, we use this. But at the end, in the second part of the panel discussion, we try to put all the domains together: the public sector information, the research data information, the data all together, and we address the main issues. And one of the things that I will always say is that there is a fair data. It's a joke that I have been saying for years, that fair data is 80% metadata and 20% of PIDs. And we can negotiate the percentage. So if we want, we can negotiate the percentage after the discussion. But it's very clear, because Sarah and Sadia were talking about metadata. Sarah was also talking about PIDs. Now, Soren underlined that you cannot talk to metadata about metadata and PIDs to the users. The users need to understand what FAIR is good for, because it has a big component of technical issues. So we have to simplify this. And also, we have to think about a question that I posed in the EOSC 2018 summit in Brussels. That is how we are going to deal with the interoperability between two big infrastructures that we are creating in Europe. One hand is the European data portal, and in the other hand is EOSC. They have both data. How we are going to construct the interoperability beyond the metadata, beyond the standards, beyond the fairness. And I think we need something that is not mentioned, and I don't know how to define it. We need political interoperability. We can address semantic interoperability. We can address the legal interoperability, but we need a political interoperability. We are creating big infrastructures with a lot of potential for making their life better, which is what research is about, which is the public sector information should be applied for. So that's an important issue. And also another point is the data quality. What is data quality? I would just to take note of the recommendation of the bibliography that Sadia made in the chat. But the data quality is the make the data useful. And the way to make the data useful is to use, again, rich metadata. And then the question comes again, what is rich metadata? So we are having these kind of things. And at the end, we go up to the trust, that it was the last point of the discussion. And I didn't expect it to have this, I think it was bring up for Robert, and I didn't expect it, this discussion here, but it reminded me a fantastic approach, which is I found, let me copy in the chat, one of the, I think this is one of the options, but this is the normal approach from the semantic web, the old approach for the semantic web stack, where the last top of the mountain, of the stack of the cake, as we used to call it, is trust. We were trying to, at the beginning, when the web, when the semantic web, which is what we are discussing here in the ENDORSE conference, it's a conference about public sector information, but with a layer of a high technical discussion about metadata, about the standards. I couldn't attend the whole conference, but it's all about semantics. And when we build up the semantic web, the highest point of the iceberg, or the highest point of the cake, of the stack, it was the web of trust. Now we have in our hands something which is more important, which is create the web of trustworthy data. And it's something that we are doing there. And we are just talking about trustworthy repositories to put the data there. But who is going to give the trustworthiness of the evaluation? For example, when you told me, when we were discussing this panel with the organizers, we say, well, you have to make recommendations. And I say, oh, I don't want to make recommendations, because who is going to recommend the recommender? So we keep at making yet another recommendation, yet another declaration. But one of my recommendations will be trying to build up the trust based on the technology, based on the standards, that is the discussion that we have, that is what we control, but also we'll try to build the trustworthiness of the data on the basis of the citizens, because they are the ones that they are claiming for this data, for this trust. So that would be my wrapping up discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Søren. Thank you, Eva, for your stunning wrap up. We have still a couple of minutes left, and I'm looking at the chat for some questions of the audience. We already had some questions, but Joke, do you have a question regarding to the wrap-up?
Yeah, I think. Yeah,
I could also.
Yeah.
I have another thought which I forgot in my report. So I think Sadia mentioned that we need more than metadata standards, but also classifications and context. And I found this thought very important. I would actually say often when it's about open government data, also research data, the best metadata from my point of view is actually a mapping from the data to a vocabulary, so that we have an ontology or a vocabulary which describes the data itself. Yeah, so that we describe, for example, if we have a tabular data, that we have a definition what the columns in this data set mean. And that's, from my perspective, the best metadata, because it allows us to search then for data sets which have a certain column in there, for example, a chemical molecule or a disease or a symptom, when we have defined that. And that's, I think, a very important aspect, that we focus on describing the data sets and use this as metadata also for the retrieval. And we can also use that then for data integration. So, but sometimes this thought is a bit lost, because sometimes librarians, I myself leading a library, and I have some discussions with my colleagues there, they think about metadata as something external describing the object. But I think we need to make the meta, of course, when you have a book, you need to describe it a bit from the outside, but if you have a data set, it's already structured, we can actually describe the structure of the data set and use that as metadata. And that's, from my perspective, something which could help us a lot, creating these data spaces which which we were talking about also in the earlier sessions, like GAIA-X or international data space, European data spaces, that we have these data descriptions basically by means of mappings to vocabularies and to ontologies, and then we can integrate and have more data interoperability, and can also create analytics on top of that. I think it might also give rise actually to a new type of research or science, because currently one step in research and science is about creating an hypothesis, which you then validate later on. And this requires our intuition as researchers. We need to have an intuition. What could be an hypothesis to test? But once we have data, integrated large-scale data from a lot of researchers, we could actually also create hypotheses automatically by, for example, discovering correlations in the data, and then these correlations could become hypotheses to check whether there's really connection and between them. So I think these are very important aspects which will probably help us a lot in the future, maybe to make bigger, faster progress or more systematically explore the area of different research questions.
Okay, thank you for this these extra thoughts, Søren. So I also truly believe it's not only about findability, finding the data, but also about creating data that's meaningful and can be interpreted by machines and can be linked to other domains within the context of the data spaces and GAIA-X. I see that we have maybe time for one last quick question. It's a question from George Yanis, and he's wondering whether we think that the primary catalyzer for more open data will be in the public or in the private sector. I think you're on mute, Eva.
Yes. I opened it up, but it was closed again. Sorry. I can't take that one, but I think it's also another question in the slide about this thing about the public and private sector information. And I think that it will deserves a new conference to talk about open data in the private sector information. I worked in a report last year about how to get the value of the data, the openness of the data in the private sector, and also that's a richness on opening up the private data in the private data, and put all together in the same infrastructure, or put all together in the same endeavor of having better world based on data research. But the point is that I think the main catalyzer is public sector information, because we have the control through the law about that. And the law sometimes is a motivator of will for the administration, because if not, we will not do things. And to have the private data based on the law, I mean, you need to include the private sector in the public research, which is not very often. And always you bump into the IPR issues and the intellectual protection and the industrial protection, which is legitimized, but you have here a good example with the COVID-19. But we have done in the public domain, in the open science, with the vaccine, particularly the AstraZeneca. I will not evaluate it as a medical doctor, because I'm not a medical doctor, but I will evaluate the collaboration of the vaccine, of the process. That couldn't be possible in a private only exclusive environment. So I think we have to also put the private sector in the playing room and let them play with us.
George, a small word to follow up on this?
It's a tricky question asked, because we have seen on several sectors, perhaps in Google traffic, that open data came from private sector without any rules, but still very useful. Of course, with a lot of open GDPR issues, etc., but still there, and again a catalyzer. So it can be both ways, public or private.
Okay.
Community building, trust.
So you're looking at the time?
Yes, we will round up a roundtable. Thank you very much. It was very interesting. I would like to thank the speakers, panelists, rapporteurs, and also the audience. With my apologies that the Slido didn't work out how it should be. But I think we have many inputs to take away from this roundtable, this conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you both very much for excellent moderating, and thank you to the panelists and all the audience for their great questions as well. An engaging and entertaining session there as well. We're going to go now to our closing remarks, and I'm delighted to have to join me to talk about what we've gotten out of this conference over the past few days. Frank Noel from the Publications Office of the European Union and Natalia Aristimuño Perez from the Directorate General for Informatics. Frank, hello, nice to see you. Natalia, are you there as well, just to check you're connected? Yes, wonderful to have both of you. First of all, let me just start by asking, what are the aspects that you particularly enjoyed about the ENDORSE conference?
Okay, good afternoon, first of all. Of course, the level of participation is very positive. And we are really glad to see how the ENDORSE conference managed to bring together so many speakers, program committee members and participants from different organizations, but also in terms of geography. Now, I'd like to take the opportunity also to thank the organization team that did a tremendous job there. And I think all this shows the importance of interoperability, which, as Commissioner Hans said, in the opening, is at the very heart of the EU project.
Thank you. Natalia, your thoughts then as well. What were the highlights?
Yeah, well, first thing to follow on Frank's word is interoperability. I would say that the number of times that interoperability has been said during the conference is amazing. So I'm very happy to have seen that. Also across the various presentations, I was very happy to see how the work that we initiated under the ISA2 program is really at the heart of many current and future projects. And the ENDORSE conference has been very important to show cases of how member states are really taking the lead on interoperability.
Well, I think
by building new. Sorry.
No, it really was the buzzword. Please go ahead.
No.
Okay, so day one then, it focused on cross-organizational environments. Frank, what particularly struck you about that day, about that particular focus?
Well, if you allow me, I would rather say that the cross-organizational element or dimension has in fact been present during the whole conference. Well, in that respect, I'd like to stress the role, of course, of EU institutions that can be trustful sources of quality data. For instance, you can take multilingual vocabularies or open data. Now, during these 4 afternoons, and also on day one, I think we also heard about the remaining challenges. For instance, I was struck by the number of different ontologies existing in the legal domain. And I said different, maybe I could say competing. And in this context, I was very happy or interested in hearing one of the participants or one of the speakers yesterday saying that interoperability is not about technology. It's about realizing that people have to work together, which I think is key.
Okay, Natalia, what did you take away from that? From that?
Sorry.
Yeah.
So I would like to highlight in the opening keynote on linked data, even the streams, there was underline the importance of putting in place an API architecture to access and combine data, which can be applied across various domains. And this, as Frank said, is about collaboration, but is also how horizontal interoperability and data are, and how we have to facilitate these exchanges. And I would like also to highlight that we are not at the end of the journey, and the future Slovak presidency that starts in July this year, they have in their priorities the semantic interoperability framework.
Okay. Law as code and e-procurement were obviously extensively discussed days 2 and 3. We really looked closely at those. And that gave us a good state of play about the ongoing developments at the level of the EU institutions, the member states. So, Frank, what do you consider to be the key opportunities and challenges for the coming years within those domains?
Okay, so let me pick up on law as a code. I think we need to continue developments on standardized identifiers and also metadata. At the end, we are talking about structuring legislative content. So the uptake of ELI, for instance, showcased by Luxembourg and Spain, was a good example in that respect. And it was also a showcase of collaboration between European institutions and member states. Now, all this at the end has to do with connecting the dots, which is probably the sentence we heard most during the 4 afternoons, of course with interoperability, as Natalia said. But I would like to add something there. I think that before even thinking about connecting the dots, sometimes we should maybe reflect upon why we are creating new ones instead of reusing existing assets. And I think that was also one of the messages delivered today by Fabien Gandon in his keynote speech. So,
absolutely, yeah. Natalia, you have a position on this as well.
Yeah, I will focus more on the part on e-procurement, where we had a very good overview of the state of play of the procurement ontology, where the idea is indeed not to reinvent, but to reuse what is there and to build on what is there, but also broaden the discussion, taking into account also the notion of smart and open contracts. All these are essential components for any public administration for more machine actionable as a key driver for the digital transformation. And when listening on all these and not creating new dots, but connecting existing ones, this make me also think about the relevance of the common assessment method for standards and specifications, also known as CAMS, which in fact helps to ensure that the public administrations can assess and select the most relevant interoperability standards when they are procuring new services, for example, without having to reinvent and avoiding that they or the private sector they would work with would reinvent new standards, but really looking at which ones are the best fit for purpose. Thank you.
So today we discussed these upcoming data spaces with examples in different sectors. You've got health, you've got mobility, and so on. So how can we ensure interoperability, again, that buzzword, between these different sectoral spaces? We don't want silos. Natalia, perhaps you can go first this time.
Yeah, well, indeed, it is very important, and I have heard also that if you have too many standards, also this is not good. So we have to reduce what is there. We have already a lot of core vocabularies, and a lot of work has been done on setting different application profiles, and this plays really an essential role to connect the data and the digital resources across domains, avoiding this creation of silos. Many of the smart cities initiatives, which were also referred this afternoon in the presentations on the data spaces and Gaia-X, require really to connect, as you said, data related to mobility, to environment, or to health. And the standardization efforts that we are doing on the semantic interoperability will contribute to this. And it was also mentioned that we have the Digital Europe program coming. This will be part of the priorities of this new program.
And Frank, your thoughts, please.
Okay, well, I think if you step back a little bit and if you look at what we heard today, we are back to the good old triptych: people, process, and technology. So people, because we need skills, we need sharing culture, we need trust. We also heard a lot about governments, about communities, about standard setting, and ideally not so many standards, as Natalia said. And technology, of course, technology, we heard a lot about that, about strange acronyms like SCOS, RDF, Spark Fuel, Shackle. I hope you enjoyed that, Jennifer. But, okay, but at the end, we were at the very heart of this conference. We need reference data assets. We need to have alignment of semantics. But it's not sufficient to have the existence of these assets. It's also about sharing assets and disseminating them. So here I'd like to, of course, stress the importance and the role of open data at EU level. If you think about the open data portal, where we grant access to data assets to build services on top of public administration data. So, but again, people, process, technology, the good old triptych.
Well, as you said, very acronym heavy these last 4 days. Any final words on strategic actions to be taken? We've been asking our audience all week to give us thoughts and feedback. So what's your thoughts and feedback?
Well, if I may start. In fact, my last word would be repeating one of the first words we heard when the Publications Office Director General said that interoperability and sharing and opening data is at the end about evolving mentalities and about cultural change. This is about wanting to work together. And this willingness to work together has to be seen between information systems architect and information architect, between member states and European institutions, between public and private sector. And I think the success of the conference is probably a strong signal that we need to continue discussing about all these topics: interoperability, reference data, semantics, and even more so in the context when we want to have 100% of digitalization of public services fueled by the pandemics. And this is also a target of the digital decade, which has been recently adopted. Now, I don't really like just talking. I like also action. So as a follow-up to the conference, one of the things we envisage is to set up a platform to continue sharing information and continue discussing on these topics, probably on JoinUp. And there we would give access to an updated list of things you probably like now: ontologies, knowledge graphs, and thesauri. So before Natalia giving the final word, I would say have a nice weekend and stay tuned.
Natalia?
Yeah, well, first of all, I would like that, as Frank was talking about people, collaboration, and evolving mentalities, this has been proven by this conference that has been co-organized. So I think this has shown how we can have much more impact by working together. I also would like to thank you all the participants because they have been sharing their views, their experience, also asking sometimes challenging questions, but this is the way to move forward. Interoperability has been mentioned many times, as I said, and we have seen that there is still some work to do, which is good. We can enjoy still on this topic. But I would like to invite all of you to help us to shape the future interoperability policy that we are co-designing now together with the member states. So if you would like to shape this new policy, I would like to invite you all to contribute to the public consultation that is running right now till the 25th of April. So please provide all your input to help us in this new policy that will be set up. And for the rest, I would like to thank all the organizers and all the speakers and wish you all a very nice weekend.
Thank you both very much. There was one question that came in Slido that was obviously very key, and the question was, will this become an annual event? Because people think it should. So I guess you don't have an answer straight away on that, but I guess watch this space. Thank you so much. I can only echo what you said. It has been a great 4 days, more than 120 speakers and thousands of ideas, I think, put forward. So it'll be a job for us all to sort through those, but we will do that in the coming weeks. You'll be able to see already there are recordings of sessions on the website, so you can go to the office of the Publications Office of the European Union and find your ENDORSE page, and you'll find all sorts of information then. Thank you so much for your questions. Without it, this event would not have been a success. Have a great weekend, and we hope to chat again soon.